Good evening, everyone. Welcome back then to another LFM stream here for round number 9. Yes, we are making our way through this championship very rapidly. Time flies when you're having fun. To the Suzuka race circuit here in the Case King Pro Series. And we are in for a fantastic evening of action, of course, as always, here in the Pro Series. But tonight, we have that added factor of time, because we have a 90-minute race around this fantastic circuit, as opposed to our usual hourly races that we tend to have for most of the weeks during this series. And extra time gives more opportunity for drama, for weather to play into effect, and also for all of those factors that we talk about, whether it be tyre wear, whether it be setup, confidence, overtaking capability, you name it. It gives time for all of that to play out, all of that to have more impact in these slightly longer races. And 30 minutes may not sound like a lot, but things can change very quickly in such types of racing, and these drivers need to be at the top of their game. And Suzuka race circuit, such an incredible driver's track. It really does bring out the best of the very best on the grid, and it will demonstrate some of those weaknesses of drivers that maybe not necessarily that don't have a talent. We have an absolutely starstruck lineup as always in the Pro Series, but maybe haven't quite dialed in their car as much, maybe haven't quite tuned out some of those issues. We've seen on a number of occasions in the past Mercedes go flying off at 130R. For example, we've seen cars fall off at the S's, particularly in the early laps when the car tyres are slightly cold and the fuel is very heavy. So this circuit does very much push a car and driver combination to its limit. So be sure to buckle up and stick with us for the action for this evening. But doing a little bit of a recap, if you did miss all of what we had taking place last week, then we were at the wonderful circuit of Misano. We were in Italian paradise, and it was Italian dreams that were coming true at the front of the grid as well, but not quite the way we initially expected it to play out. Dario Iemolo put a fantastic pole position lap together upon his return to the championship, and looks set to maybe take a victory for Lamborghini and make it an Italian driver in an Italian car winning at an Italian circuit. But drama on the opening lap with Noah Reeder saw that put into jeopardy, and Eric Del Fanta, his fellow compatriot, very much was hot to capitalise on the opportunity and took a very well-deserved and maturely driven drive to win his first race in the Pro Series and very much bring himself into some level of decent championship contention, because now he finds himself 4th in the standings. Now, of course, remember, we do have the world of drop scores. We have 2 drop scores over the course of this championship, which, if you were to start accounting for those now, your net championship leader very likely would actually be Tinko van der Velde, of course, with all of his incredible race wins, 4 to his name so far this season. So very much Eric bringing himself into contention. Consistency has been pretty solid, and maybe he will look to carry that momentum into Suzuka tonight. We will have to wait and see. But before we dive too much into this evening's race, I do want to highlight something which is pretty exciting on the horizon. If you have not quite caught it over on Twitter or in the Discord server, to which if you're not in the Discord server, I would heavily suggest you go and join that. We have a wonderful community now with, I think, over 106,000 members overall here at LFM. We're a friendly bunch, and, you know, whether you just love motorsport all round, you're a die-hard sim racer, or you're just liking what you're seeing in these broadcasts, then do look to join us over there, and you can keep up to date with all of the latest news and championships, you name it. But special piece of news that came out officially from LFM this week is that a custom BOP is looking to be in play by the time we make our way over to Season 12. So we will stick, of course, for fair competition with the championship and BOP that we have had over the last 9 weeks, or excuse me, last 8 weeks. We are in the 9th week. But when we head into Season 12, a custom BOP is being put in the works at the moment. And of course, much like the original post said, not every BOP is perfect, but a community put together BOP with some extra work and refinement and perhaps a little bit less restriction than, of course, the SRO implications that kind of are enforced, really, and understandably, you know, it's the official game of the SRO Championship, but for online racing, it does sometimes hinder that element of balanced competition. So LFM putting in a lot of hard work over the coming weeks to have that in place for Season 12. So if that doesn't get you excited and 90 minutes of racing around Suzuka with some of the best drivers on the platform doesn't get you excited, then I'm not quite sure what will. But we shall look to dive into the action very, very shortly. So let's take a little bit of a tour around the Suzuka race circuit. 18 turns and 6 kilometers of motorsport goodness. You make your way through the rather almost comically named first corner. It's I must admit they worked very hard on that one, but it's not one to be messed with in the car because it is very high commitment, very high speed through the formidable S's of 3, 4, 5, and 6, and up round Dunlop curve. Really have to be high on the commitment on power there. Through the first and second Degner before you make your way under the bridge, round the kink of turn 10 and down into the hairpin, overtaking opportunities there. Through 200 the sort of slightly lesser known cousin to the main famous corner of this circuit, which we come up to that now after Spoon Curve. You go through 130, a big high-speed corner here, a lot of confidence required for that one, and then through the Casio Triangle to round out the lap and close out that one. And like I say, it is a circuit that will come back to bite you if you don't respect it, if you don't have the car dialed in the way that it needs to be. It certainly will show you any weaknesses because it's very high tyre wear. The tyre wear is also relatively imbalanced as well to a certain extent. The front tyres take an absolutely brutal punishment around here, and so the dynamic of your car changes a lot during the race as well. You go from potentially what could be quite a pointy car when you initially start qualifying to one that's maybe a little bit lackluster and understeery later on, and that kind of, comes with flip sides in either direction. On the one hand, you want agility, but you also want stability, so how do you end up putting that all together is a very interesting one indeed. Drivers have just started getting their last bits of practice together, so we will make our way over into the server in just a moment. I do see a little question in the chat. I was trying to read that. And so, yeah, to answer that, fundamentally, at least the way that I understand it, because this is the official SRO Blancpain GT Championship game, the BOP that each car receives, so effectively all of the tuning aspects in terms of power and weight, very much reflect identically what is applied in real life. Now, of course, as fantastic as a simulator as ACC is, as we often always see, there are always subtle differences between the sim and the real thing. Those subtleties end up meaning that those BOP adjustments that are made in real life don't always follow through at exactly balancing out performance in the way that we would then see it on the real circuit. And even then, sometimes, we see from time to time, from event to event, that even that doesn't always go 100% as planned. It is a very difficult thing to do overall and try to get a complete fair balance, but it certainly is something that when we make our way over to Sim is a little bit trickier to implement on a successful way when we do mimic real life in that regards. But with this custom BOP, driven by both the community, who of course have echoed, the various concerns highlighted when one car is particularly weak, when one car is particularly strong, that between that and all the hard work that LFM is putting in over the coming weeks, hopefully we should end up with both the best of both worlds effectively, where we have the wonderful sim of ACC, but with also that little bit more fine-tuning for a fair competition across all cars when we make our way into racing. So hopefully that answers the question on that front. And thank you, Florian, for the very kind words. And welcome all of you that are joining the new Twitch channel. This has only been going now for, I believe, this is our third stream over here, and we've already crossed over 350 followers. I was even going to set that as a little bit of a benchmark, so perhaps we could cross that milestone for today, but no need, because you guys are smashing out of the park, and I hope you are enjoying all of the action. But speaking of which, let's make our way over to the practice session. So drivers have a few moments left to go in this to try to get themselves dialed in before we head into qualifying, and then of course our 90-minute race. And we talk quite often about this, and Suzuka really presents a very interesting challenge in terms of what we end up quite often discussing, and that is those ideas of what do you do in terms of those final moments of preparation? You look to try to get yourself completely set into qualifying trim, maximize what you can do over a single lap, maybe get out of the chaos at the beginning of the race, and then hopefully set yourself up for maybe a bit of a cleaner race overall? Or do you try to optimize race pace and you sacrifice maybe what could be, you know, with how close the margins are on this sort of grid, could be anywhere between 5 to 10 positions, potentially, but just a bit of extra time so that during the course of a race stint, and maybe even if we have some dynamic weather playing into this as well, because we've got an extra 30 minutes for that to come into effect, that you can just tune your car maybe to be a bit more forgiving, a bit more flexible in the challenges you present it with. And considering we've got high speed, slow speed corners, we've got top speed dependency, we need slow speed traction, Suzuka throws everything at your car. So being able to have it dialed into a perspective where it's going to be feeling comfortable across all of those different circumstances is something that is super, super important. And of course, a 90-minute race, generally speaking, is going to be the more influential factor, unless there's a horrible lap 1 incident, which fingers crossed there isn't. I've done a couple of pretty bad commentator curses over the last couple of weeks. I had an absolute belter at Masano, unfortunately. So I'm going to try to stay away from that. So I won't make too much in the way of predictions, because otherwise, unfortunately, usually the worst ones may come true. But yes, absolutely right. That each driver is different in terms of how they settle into the car the best, in terms of what they feel they can pick up from the car from different circumstances. So it's all very much sort of to personal taste. In these final few moments, so Dara Iamolo, of course, our pole sitter and very nearly debut race winner from last week, looking very quick again in the Lamborghini, currently sitting on a 57.8, 3/10 of a second clear of anyone else. And then we have Matteo Vignoli, Adam Szymanski, Niels Knox, and Gert Fischer rounding out the top 5. And that is because the English Twitch channel, to answer Red Lucas' question in the chat, has been a new addition as of 3 weeks ago. We were over on YouTube for quite a while, and then we've made the move over to Twitch to join our fellow nations of both the German stream over on what is now Low Fuel Motorsport _DE, and then, of course, our Spanish friends over at Top Racing TV. So it's a fairly new channel in the making, but this is where the English streams are looking to take place. But if you do prefer rewatches on YouTube, the VODs of all of these streams are now being placed onto the original YouTube channel as well, so you can catch up with all of the action over there. Just under a minute left to go, and IMLO still looking firmly in that top spot, although whilst it was a 3/10 of a second improvement for Gert Fischer, 58.5. Of course, these lap times, we don't know how much fuel these guys are on, we don't know what setup they are even running, so it's difficult to place their pace at the moment, but almost a second difference between Gert Fischer and Iamolo right now. But what I do see is 2 BMWs inside of that top 5. So it's very much looking like it could be potential opportunities for the German outfits. And yes, I do appreciate that unfortunately there are both positives and negatives to both sides. But yeah, we will be looking to stay over here. But yes, you can catch up on all of action. I shall do my best on when it comes to replays and things like that to make sure that we don't miss out on too much. But anyone that has been sticking with the Pro Series for quite a while will know these drivers do like to keep me on my toes and make sure that we've got about 50 million things usually all happening at once, so it does get a bit tricky, but we're trying to keep in touch with everything that is going on. And a big thank you to all of those that have continued to join this channel over here. So we should be making our way into qualifying in just a moment. It's been a dry session throughout practice, but like I say, opportunities still potentially on the horizon for some wet weather racing, as we do have fairly high changeability in conditions. Admittedly, the percentage chance of rain isn't the highest, but it is relatively sizable. But that changeability factor, effectively the unpredictability of the conditions that these drivers will face, 30%, not something to be snuffed at, especially over the course of a 90-minute race distance as well. So definitely opportunities for things to come into effect. Even winds can play havoc around a circuit like this, because if you have a tailwind into 130R, and like I say, Mercedes in particular quite often have been relatively unstable into that corner, not exactly something you want to be facing with your car. You do not want the back end of that one to go light when you head into such a high commitment corner. Timo Karppinen in the Grip Packs Engineering Lamborghini is the first away. I think he ran into a little bit of a spot of bother last week at Misano, unfortunately. Didn't seem to have the best of luck in the opening lap. And that really did kind of set the tone for the rest of his race, unfortunately. So he'll be looking to get another good result. But it does look like the Lamborghinis are finding a bit of form between the likes of IMLO. We also had some other Lambos up there last week that were looking pretty fast. Karppinen definitely being one of them over the course of a single lap. And with the way in the, as Boris gives me a rather kind reminder, to head over to the website, and just we'll sort that out. In the meantime, don't worry, everybody, we'll get all of that going very nicely. The way in which that Lamborghini is finding pace in this current stage of championship, we always knew it had decent agility. It also has, you know, pretty good horsepower compared to the likes of a lot of cars. The Audi, of course, very similar platform overall for that one. So definitely opportunities for that car to be faster around here, because it will start to extend some of its strengths and advantages at those circuits. So we'll have to see how all of that plays out. Karppinen, though, going to be the first one to head out on to the circuit. And we'll see how he gets on. Boris, do let me know if that has fixed the issue over on the main website. As the Grip Packs engineering car starts to get underway, make his way into those S's, taking big chunks of curbs through the first few apexes, and manages to keep it nice and steady. You can get away with having a pretty decent amount of curb usage through there. In actual fact, it can really benefit cars that are a bit on the understeery side by nature, as you can use the way in which the suspension lifts on that inside tyre, and that very much opens up the opportunity to pivot. For a couple of reasons, you'll get some aerodynamic pitching effects in there, and also the offset between where the grip is from left to right does start to allow the car to really rotate into the corner. So you can use those curves, but it really can bring you around slightly quicker than you might be hoping on occasion. So I have to see how all these drivers cope with that. Maybe a little bit wide down at the hairpin, but the most crucial thing is opening up the exit up the hill towards Spoon Curve, because you do reap the reward of that additional speed if you make your way up to this very high commitment left-hander. We will go on board with somebody in just a moment. We'll let everybody get their initial banker laps in and see how this very tightly packed grid is going to lie. And welcome to all the people that I do believe may have just joined over from the lowfuelmotorsport.com website. Apologies for the slight delay. Small oversight on my perspective, but the boss doing a very good job of keeping me in check. And welcome all of you for what is set to be a fantastic evening of action. We haven't missed too much, as drivers are just making their way around to round out their first laps, and Timo Karppinen will be the first one to set the pace in that Lamborghini as he makes his way to the line a little bit further down the straight than it initially feels like. It's a 58.4 from the Grip Packs engineering car. George Boothby, championship leader in overall points tally, on a 58.5. Gert Fischer, 58.7. 59.3 for Alvin Manson. All of these times come flying in. Aidan Walsingham not able to go faster than his teammate, just a couple of tenths off. We have the likes of Simonov, Niels Narks in that BS Plus competition. BMW said that he could be looking quick, but look at Adam Spansky. He has been in fantastic form and has been keeping Tinko, especially when the Audi has been a strong contender. He has very much been with him, pushing him on most occasions, especially in one lap pace, and right now finds himself going into P1 and a tenth of a second clear than this man. The man has 4 victories to his tally so far this season. He has been in stellar form, and with those drop scores in play, very much is looking like the man to beat at the end of this championship. But Still plenty of races left to go. Plenty of time for things to happen. But these Audis, once again, looking very strong. And it is V10 heaven right now as Vignoli, as I say that, decides to pop in a pretty handy lap time from the number 6 Ferrari. Purple in that first section. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. If you've ever driven the 296, it is very much along the lines of being described as a prototype. It just feels so planted. It does lack a little bit of guts and straight line capability. But there are very few other cars that give you more confidence in corners than this one. It's very nicely balanced, aerodynamically, mechanically. The electronics are the latest and greatest. Admittedly, fun fact actually, I don't know if it's the same system in the 296, but the Ferrari 488, I know, at the very least. Here in ACC, you may know that we actually have 2 stages of TC for the Ferrari, for the 488. I think it's the same in the 296. And in real life, there's actually a 3rd stage. And that 3rd stage, from what I understand, even the Ferrari works drivers in the GT Championship don't actually know what that does. Which is possibly the reason why it didn't make its way over to ACC, because when you're trying to replicate real life, it's quite handy to know what each of these things do. So, quite clearly, very, very technical. I'm sure the budding engineers behind that car all have a good idea. But, yeah, some very clever electronic stuff going on under the hood there. Meanwhile, Tinko about to improve. Iemolo's gone up to the top of the timing sheets. I think this will slot Tinko into P2. There we go, by just about half a tenth. Not able to put himself in provisional pole with 2 purple sectors, and I have a feeling that purple sector does in fact lie with Iemolo, and that's a really good demonstration of this Lamborghini platform. Both a combination of agility, as someone's gone hurtling off the circuit on the exit. The first Degner, I think. No, that's Valentine just pulling over side. I have no idea who that was. The first deck of another corner where you have to be very fast on entry. Take a chunk of curb on the right-hand side. And some cars, even though maybe a bit more forgiving now, we're over in 1.9 physics, still a lot of them will get upset by hitting that curve quite so heavily. So you do have to be very much mindful of that. But yeah, the Lamborghini, very good balance between agility, medium speed cornering, high speed, maybe not the greatest, but I tell you what, it does have a lot of horsepower from that V10 engine. Lovely sounding car, as Iemolo is more or less on his pace from his previous best lap. A couple of improvements inside the top 7, a 10th up for Vignoli, Karppinen and Marco Bischoff, but doesn't look like any of them will be challenging right now to displace the man that sits top of the timing sheets. In actual fact, Iemolo did invalidate the lap. He did find a 10th, though, in that final sector. The invalidation came a little bit earlier, but that's potentially a little bit of a means of concern for the likes of Tinko. Meanwhile, we've got Marco Bischoff next of the Lamborghinis. Of course, a car that he hasn't been with very long, but he has been progressively finding more and more form and has kept himself up there around the championship, the pointy end of the championship with consistent results. Of course, 2-time Pro Series champion in the 992. Now sets a purple middle sector for the Lamborghini. He gets himself on a P4. A couple more shuffles are around the order as well. Del Fanta, last week's race winner, and coming off the back of some very fine form and really looking to be gelling with this McLaren. Of course, the car is supported by quite a host of the lineup here in the Pro Series. But let's try to catch who looks like they might be setting up a lap. That is, I think, Valentine on an outlap at the moment in the McLaren by the looks of it. So I think let's go on board with the Frenchman and see what it's like to run around this Suzuka race circuit, trying to open up the exit of Casio Triangle as much as he can, and then roaring his way down the start-finish straight. Get a little bit of time to think about your entry in towards the first corner, but after that, it is full on from there. A little bit of traffic coming out of the pit lane won't influence him at all. Big commitment, couple of downshifts on the entry, all the way out to the left-hand side of the circuit, swinging back across into the camber. All about dialing yourself in as tight as possible to these corners, because you're more and more rewarded the more that you're brave towards those curves. Try to flow your way from one apex to the other as you head through 3, 4, 5 then patience through 6. You need to make sure you open up Dunlop curves, so get yourself back over to the right-hand side of the circuit. Floor it as early as you can as you head over the crest. Be careful of the exit. Oh, Valentine almost went sailing off into the gravel there, but the Frenchman keeps it nailed in now in towards the first. Degner bumping over those curves. McLaren a little bit less steady than some of the other cars that we have here. Patience through a second. Degner on the power as you go under the bridge, and now flying up towards the King. Straighten up the braking into the hairpin as it looks to take, I would have thought, first gear is actually keeping in second, trying to minimize the wheel spin on the exit there. Will maybe lose a little bit of initial grunt though, but McLaren does struggle with low speed traction, so maybe the better way to go for that car. Roaring his way up through 200 now, back over to the right hand side. Use that little bit of not quite tarmac, it's not quite AstroTurf either, but sort of almost painted tarmac, I do believe, on the entry to really open up Spoon Curve as you flow from one apex to the next, and then down towards 130R. Pretty straightforward in qualifying trim, although it's pretty high speed and a little bit on the scary side. Still, regardless of all of that, just had a little bit of a lift and using all of that exit curve as he now heads towards the Casio Triangle, braking just before the bridge, down in towards second gear once more. And in actual fact, I think looked like a little bit of a tentative run through there. I think he may have been trying to set up the exits for another lap, but Suzuka certainly a very fast and flowing circuit. Meanwhile, in the sister car over at Veloce, of course, Yassit and Veloce very much being hand in hand with one another. We've got Grantis Correcus, the reigning Pro Series champion, currently only up by a 1/10 of a second, and hasn't really shown the form of last season that we would have expected. He's been a rising star over the last few seasons here in the Pro Series. Finally got his first race victory and took a number of victories. I think he had a 50% win rate by the time we finished in Season 10 and absolutely dominated that championship. But he moved over to the McLaren. He just hasn't quite managed to find the same sort of pace as the likes of George Boothby. Even on occasion, Walsingham has been pretty handy in this car as well. And it's been, Correcus hasn't had to adapt to so many cars. We've seen Boothby in a variety of machinery over the last few seasons and also elsewhere in his other ACC endeavours. But Grantis has generally been committed to the Porsche, much like Marco Bischoff. You didn't really see him in too many other cars, and perhaps that's why it's taken a little bit longer. Of course, still exceptionally quick, but not quite on the same form and able to do that same one-lap special level of racing that we saw from him last season. He has found a 10th, which should help move him up in towards the top 10 and maybe just behind his teammates. In actual fact, a smidge in front, half a second down over the likes of Iemolo, who is still topping these timing sheets. Got Niels Narks on a lap as well in that BS Plus competition. BMW, a car that's been, I think, really maximised by Niels. Of course, a massive amount of experience in the cockpit of that car, has been involved in sim racing for a number of years, and now is very much handing over all of his wisdom, all of his knowledge to the younger generation. I do believe, if I remember rightly, he participates in the Duo Series with a very young man, Alan, who I believe is 11 years old, who very much is a sim racing star of the future, and with the way things are going between the real world and the virtual one, could even be a real-life racing driver in the future as well. We've seen so much crossover and so much demonstration time and time again, more and more recently, about how these skills are transferable between the sim and the real thing. So BS Plus and Niels very much looking to try to of course, develop a fantastic, hopefully future star of the BS Plus competition team, but also really nurture that talent in a positive way. So a lot of kudos to the German driver for that one. Puts himself into P4 in the closing stages of qualifying, as all these drivers starting to make their way onto their final laps. Marco Bischoff won't get another one in after he rounds out this next lap, so we'll have to see what he is able to do. Currently a 10th of a second up as he makes his way through Spoon Curve. Gets a good run through there. What's the exit looking like? It's very much on the edge of track limits, and he has seemingly managed to maintain that 2/10 advantage. Koreca's finding time, Carpenter finding time, so is IMLO. We'll have to see whereabouts Tinko is on the circuit in a moment as Marco Bischoff flies through 130, are pushing it to the absolute extremes. He manages to keep it all together. There's a McLaren who's not quite done the same as abandoning the lap to Casio Triangle. Natural fat Marco Bischoff flying through the final chicane. He almost went purple. It's not going to be good enough for pole position, but it's a damn fine time from Bischoff as he heads towards the line. It's going to be good enough for P3, just 63 thousandths of a second, but Tinko is in the opening part of the lap and he is going exceptionally quickly. IMLO not improving at the moment. Carpenter has found a little bit of time as well. Tinko a little bit up and down on his delta, though. It's going to be very close in the closing stages. What about Gert Fischer for West Competition Racing, number 22 car, trying to get to the shortest line possible, as is the McLaren up ahead of him. Fischer up into P13. Noah Reeder has found 3/10 as he's still got a chunk of the lap left to go. Meanwhile, Tinko van der Velde, your net championship leader when you start to consider the implications of drop scores. Your winningest driver by a big margin of this season so far. 4 victories to the young Dutchman's name. And right now he is trying to see if he can snatch pole position away from IMLO. IMLO is not going to improve, so nothing further that he can do. Carpenter, I'm not sure, is going to be able to do anything about those in front. No, he has lost it out of the final chicane. And look at the delta for Tinko. It's an absolutely marginal improvement. He's there or thereabouts with a 10 through in towards the Casio Triangle for the final time in qualifying. Will it be another pole masterclass from Tinko van der Velde? He absolutely ate the curb on the entry. He's compromised the exit. He's losing time, I think, towards line. It's going to be mighty close as he has the drag race, and he's not improving by the looks of it on the graphic. What's it going to be? And it's not good enough. So Dario IMLO makes it 2 pole positions back to back here in the Pro Series. Fantastic stuff from the man that saw that Lamborghini go to the front of the pack at Misano. And whilst the race did not go his way at the start, has he opened up an opportunity to put it back into winning contention? We'll have to wait and see, and it will be a long race for him, especially with Tinko looking back in very fine form. But he is wanting redemption. He wants the race victory that he will obviously feel like he deserved from the previous round. And what a fantastic way to do it, because qualifying ahead of Tinko at any circuit is not a easy feat by any stretch of the imagination. And I think I saw this for the first time last week. I thought the Italian theme was purely because we were at Misano, but so far I've seen that we've got pasta on the go, we've got pizza on the go as well, and we've got people that are so dedicated to the Case King Pro Series that you've orchestrated your mealtime around the race start, and I applaud you. If I could hand you out a sticker, then I would, but I'm afraid I have to take a virtual high five from me instead. But glad that you are always looking to enjoy the ride here over in the Pro Series, and I reckon that we are in for a blinder once again for tonight at Suzuka Race Circuit. We will take a little bit of a walk through the grid in just a second and see exactly how our drivers are lining up for this evening. So IMLO starts on the front spot of the grid once again for the second time in 2 weeks. Great stuff from him with Tinko van der Velde not quite finding familiar territory at the front of the grid, but still very much opportunities for him to take a 5th race win of the season. Marco Bischoff, your 2-time Pro Series champion, starts in P3 with Teemu Karppinen starting on the second row of the grid, making it 3 Lamborghinis inside that top 4, looking very good for the Raging Bull cars. Meanwhile, Vignoli, great qualifying from him as well in the number 6 Ferrari, and then Niels Narks, I think he'll be pretty pleased with that one. Again, the BMW looking like a decent bet, as Adam Spansky didn't quite manage to improve at the end and keep Tinko as honest as perhaps we would have typically expected from previous occasions, but keep an eye on him. Very good race pace indeed. Grantis Koreca starts in P8 ahead of his teammate. I was saying that Grantis hasn't quite been able to match the pace of his teammates recently, and he has shut me up on the spot, so great stuff from him as he looks to dial in that McLaren bit by bit as we make our way along. Maybe still race winning potential inside that Veloce McLaren in closing stages of the season. George Boothby and Van Valentine Barrier round out the top 10 with last week's race winner Eric Del Fanta starting in P11, and then Aidan Walsingham, I do believe the last of the Veloce McLarens, starting in P12. Gert Fischer for West Competition Racing in that very standout purple liveried BMW. Noah Reeder, a man that is still adapting to his Mercedes, has shown good pace from time to time, was very much up there, and if he'd had a cleaner start to the race, maybe could have been challenging for at least a podium by the end of it. So he'll be looking to try and see if he can make a bit of amends for that one. Aaron Manson starts in P15 with Giardier, and then Kazuki Omashima, a race winner from Valencia. The Japanese driver, but hasn't quite managed to put together the same sort of pace elsewhere in the calendar, so we'll have to see what he can do this evening. Oliver Hagstrom in the number 16 McLaren starts in P18 with Michael Frey and Renault Koets rounding out the top 20, and then we have Samir Foch in the 21st spot, the Latvian driver in that number 26 Lamborghini. Then we have Dennis Vitschoka with a livery that I don't recall seeing before. Very striking one. We've also got another another that concept of the split livery design getting more and more popular, and a very nice example there from Dennis. As then we have Pogorelov followed up by another rather explosive livery to screen. We won't have any difficulties missing out on some of these cars. Sasha Engel in the number 30 car starting in 24th, with Bailey Thompson making a return from his debut last week in 25th position. Igor Simonov starts in 26th with Luca Wieninger in the number 20 car as cars start to get themselves underway for the formation lap. Jonathan Clifford rounds out the 28th spot with just 2 cars behind him of the BMW pairing of Jan Drexler in the number 18 car, followed up by Nico Pennanen, the Finnish driver who has been very much a long-term dedicated man to this BMW and has taken some pretty good results with it at times. Not a driver that we tend to see right at the pointy end of the field, but has had some very, very commendable drives and has often been able to make use of opportunities and issues of other cars to really soar his way through the field. So do not count him out whatsoever. Also, looking at the skies, distinctly grey. I would have felt that we were potentially back in the UK over at Snetterton again with that level of cloud cover. So while for the first 30 minutes we are looking at dry weather, potentially some changes on the cars. Admittedly, the wind isn't massively high, so the drivers might not have to worry about that all too much in the grand scheme of things. We'll have to see how that all plays out, but certainly something for them to keep in mind as we make our way into the race, where we will have 90 minutes of action underway very shortly, and IMLO will very much be wanting to build upon the very evident pace that he demonstrated at Misano, and clearly once again the pace is there. We didn't really quite get to see, you know, the best hand from IMLO. He was very much having to work his way back through and reel in a gap that was always going to be very difficult because Del Fanta was very much on fine form as well. But Tinko van der Velde, a man that has taken 4 victories so far this season, hot on your heels in towards turn 1. It's not often that we see people starting in front of Tinko. He's a very fast man. He doesn't usually tend to stay behind them for very long either. And we know that that Audi is going to be a weapon in a straight line as well. The Lamborghini is no slouch, but that Audi will certainly be able to keep with its fellow V10 cars. So he is very much a man that could be on the move, but IMLO, will he be using the disappointment from last week as some additional fuel for the fire to really bring out his best? We'll have to wait and see. And of course, when you have those other drivers in the midst as well, Marco Bischoff, Carpenter, 2 very experienced drivers there, Niels Niox up there as well, who will be ready to pounce at the first opportunity of trouble. And Vignoli in that Ferrari, maybe a car that will struggle to make overtakes, but as the race goes on, tyre wear increases, and if we do have any variability in the weather and the grip that we have at this circuit as well, expect that Ferrari to be very dialed in and very, very quick. So keep an eye on the fellow Italian as well and see how he gets on. Making their way through the Casio Triangle then to get this race underway as IMLO looks to start getting himself into the right mindset, keeping an eye on those lights. And who will have the run down in towards turn 1. And of course we could even see a return for Marco Bischoff towards the top step. We'll have to wait and see. But for 90 minutes of racing then here at Suzuka for round number 9 of the Case King Pro Series. IMLO, will he make up for last week's disappointment? Waiting for his lights to go out. Ready to floor it. The sounds of V10s will roar in a moment. And there we go. And it looks like a pretty decent getaway from Tinko van der Velde already on the outside. Carpenter has already got past Marco Bischoff. It's side by side between the two at the very front. But IMLO's held that inside line. Carpenter's coming into play as well. Trying to see if he can get 2 positions at the very start of this race. But it doesn't look like he's going to get Tinko. Holds position firmly. So it's still IMLO the leads. Tinko van der Velde P2. That is Niles going all the way around the outside of Vignoli. And I was talking about the wealth of experience that this man has in that BMW, and he's got himself through. There's yellow flags in the background, but we've also got Carreras trying to make progress on the opening lap in that McLaren, and the Ferrari has really been left for dead in the S's, and that is 2 positions already lost for the 296, which made such great grounds in the opening part of the lap. There is chaos playing out in the background. No, as that's Barrier almost off the circuit entirely, going side by side with Adam Spansky, Noah Reeder and Gert Fischer in the background as well. Bouncing Barrier, losing positions. Del Fanta, Fischer and Noah Reeder now all in tow, trying to gain as they head up towards the hairpin. Valentine is not giving this one up. He's trying to stick a nose up the inside, manages to avoid contact. The space is given by Fischer as they head up the hill. What's going on in the background though, because we've also got Manson versus Omashima inside of the top 17 as they soar up the hill. Noah Reeder now starting to look particularly racy onto the back of Valentine, using all the grunt and torque on board that V8 Mercedes, but unable to make a move just yet as Omashima, in actual fact, the one to storm up the inside. And then we've got the 2 STL esports cars side by side on the exit of Spoon Curve as well. Still IML over leads with the likes of Van der Velde, Carpenter, Bischoff, Niox all in tow. And the biggest loser inside of that top group very much being Vignoli on the opening lap, but still finds himself in P7. Plenty of opportunities on the horizon as that looks like to Noah Reeder potentially having to go defensive from Jardier. The straight line speed of the McLaren looking pretty handy as they headed down to 130R for the first time. Not quite sure which car it was that brought out the yellow flag in the background. But generally speaking, it looks like we survived the opening lap fairly well. But I need to keep an eye on this man, Marco Bischoff, hunting around the back of Carpenter as Van der Velde and IMLO look to make a breakaway inside the top 2. And after dropping a position at the very start of this race, is very much looking to try to reclaim it as quickly as possible. Nico Peninen trying to side one up the inside of Pogorelov. He's going to be hung out to dry in towards turn 3 as he slides the BMW, but won't have any track to work with. A little bit of contact on the entrance. Samir Foch is around at the S's end. Some sort of form of contact for the number 26 car. Let's see if we can try to catch what has happened there to Samir, because I have a little bit of a fandango with my graphics. So here we go. Sammy then on the back. I think that's Sasha Engel that he is behind and making his way in towards the S's. Is there going to be contact here of some sorts? Oh, I said, didn't I, that those S's and the curves can really play havoc with the balance of your car on early stage of the race when we have cold tyres and heavy fuel. Unfortunately for Sammy, that has not played out in the way that he would have wanted whatsoever, and already into the pit lane. Big disappointment for him. Meanwhile, at the front of the field is As You Were, with IMLO actually extending his advantage over Tinko van der Velde now, with Carpenter, Bischoff and Knox all in hot pursuit. Although right now, in actual fact, granted, Carreras the man on the move, really making me eat my words in the early stages of this race. And this is what we want to see from the reigning Pro Series champion, is being at the top of his game once again. And that McLaren maybe not dialed in for one lap pace, but it is looking mighty quick in the early stages of this race. And if he was to carry that sort of pace through to the end, who knows whereabouts he could look to be finishing as he's trying to gain in the slipstream of this BMW. But the BMW pretty handy in a straight line. We've seen that time and time again. So unable to do anything on this time around. What about his teammate? Unable to make his way past the Italian of Vignoli in that Ferrari. But that Ferrari may be vulnerable to a lot of those cars behind, because I did say, you know, the way that the lap time is found in this car isn't always the easiest one to race with. So you start to struggle to keep cars behind is also in the same way as actually trying to make moves on them, because where you're fast is so important in a race. You can be the fastest driver through the S's, for example, but sometimes there's just nowhere to go. So all of that lap time can't be used. And when you get to a bit where you can't really do anything, i.e. a straight, all of those that have the biggest loud pedal are usually the ones that end up making the progress. So it's very tricky sometimes to, even when you've got the pace, to really convert it into a strong result. But he's hanging on to this group of Korekis now. I thought he might lunge one up the inside of Nils Narks, as Narks really seeming to struggle actually to keep up with Marco Bischoff and Karppinen. Over a second and a half now between Lamborghini and the BMW, so a good initial pace, but perhaps not the overall strongest of that bunch. Meanwhile, Valentine was looking pretty handy into the hairpin. Does he sense an opportunity in towards Spoon Curve? And the answer on this occasion is no. So he'll have to try to find another opportunity in just a moment. But IMLO certainly holding his nerve at the moment. In actual fact, his Karppinen's doing him some favours, as he is the one on the move, quarter of a second quicker than Tinko van der Velde. So the Lamborghinis may be actually running 1 and 2 very shortly, depending on what the Finnish driver can do. I've just seen a white flag for IMLO. I think he may have just run a little bit wide at 130R, and I'm going to stop making comments about your current race leader, because otherwise I could end up having a horrible commentator's curse once again. So instead, we shall head over and have a little bit of a gander at Grantis Korekis and see if he is able to make a move on Nils Narks this time around. I don't think he can, but somebody that's looking very racy is Gert Fischer on last week's race win. Eric Del Fanta not able to hold the inside line, although there's a big slide for Gert Fischer, and he allows 1, maybe even 2 cars back through it side by side between Valentine and the BMW. There's a lot of door banging on the entry into the S's there, but somehow the contact is not too severe. Gert Fischer holds on to P12, but we'll have to see what the stewards say. We'll catch up with them probably in around 10 to 15 minutes, and they'll have about 30 incidents they'll need to review that can sometimes take a little bit of a while to make their way through. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. IMLO, though, a second clear now of Van der Velde. Fantastic pace from him at the front of this grid. Really getting his head down and trying to press on. Meanwhile, small gaggle of cars now built up behind Valentine after being somewhat hindered from Gert Fischer's, shall we say, firm driving through the S's, I think would be a way of putting it. A possible swapping of places down at the hairpin. In actual fact, it's not quite done yet, as these two continue to battle for position. I do believe Jonathan Clifford has a great little on-board view of that is Wieninger and Coots going toe-to-toe, but the Audi in the end is the one that comes out on top. Bit of a slide for the Lamborghini driver as he makes his way through the very tricky first apex of Spoon Curve. And now heading back down towards 130R. We'll have to see how they all fare this time round. Closest bunch on this grid. Is this scrap starting to build behind Nils Narks? I thought the BMW might have some good chances of faring a bit better here, but doesn't seem to have particularly played out in that way. He does seem to be struggling to a certain extent, so not ideal for the German driver by any means at this point in the race. And Korekis Vignoli able to gain, I would imagine, in the corners, losing out a bit on the straights because that slipstream starting to become of decent benefit. Tinko van der Velde now 1.2 seconds behind Dario IMLO, and if you look at this group, it's almost a direct reflection of the gaggle of cars gathered behind Nils as well, because we have Tinko followed up by Karppinen and Bischoff, all in hot pursuit. It's V10s 1, 2, 3 and 4. But not necessarily in the order that we would have inherently expected from these drivers, as Karppinen coming under immense amounts of pressure from Marco Bischoff at this stage of the race. We're barely 10 minutes in, and we have had quite the flurry of overtakes up and down the grid, but Aiello looking pretty comfortable with where he is right now. A little bit of a mistake from the Griphax Engineering car, but not quite as much of one as it was from Omashima, though he does get the cutback. And whilst on the exit is going to be side by side between Out and Manson, Omashima is just tucked away to the side window. You can't quite see him from that angle, but there he is, the white and black car, your race winner from Valencia earlier on in the season. Unable to reclaim the position with that shorter line taken by Albert Manson on the run up the hill. The SDL Esports car makes its way up into P16. Great stuff from the Swedish driver, as more and more of you have continued to follow the channel. So a big welcome to you all, and I hope you are enjoying the incredible action that the Pro Series is delivering once more. As Marco Bischoff now really starting to ramp up the pressure on to Timo Karpinen. Keep an eye on the lap times, because Tinko van der Velde has very much kind of pulled away from this group, as Granta Korekas loses a massive amount of momentum coming out the final turn, and Vignoli is having a go now, trying to see if he can get past the reigning Pro Series champion, but he's gone very wide. And as they head through the first turn, George Boothby does what George Boothby so often is best at. Waits for the opportunity, pounces when it becomes available, and this is how this man consistently scores fantastic, consistent results. Even when he doesn't have the inherent pace, he is always putting himself in the mix to benefit as soon as the first possible chance comes along. And yes, very possibly Audi already starting to struggle with its tyres, but it must be said that Aiello's pace right now, very impressive, half a second faster than the two Lamborghinis that sit behind the Audi here, who haven't quite made the same level of progress as they looked like they were going to a few moments ago, having dropped back to around a second now at this stage of the race. So I have to see how that gap continues to play out. Meanwhile, as Vignoli looks trying to get himself together and realign his focus in this race, George Boothby now second behind Grantas Korekas, who's very much still on the rear bumper of Niels in the BMW. He's currently sitting in P5, but McLaren not able to do anything about the straight line speed of that car just yet. We're head on board the front splitter of Marco Bischoff, who's gaining in the slipstream. How brave is he through 130R? And you can see Karpinen just willing to risk a little bit more. Of course, we can't quite see what the track limit situation is for these drivers. Hopefully they haven't accumulated too many warnings at this early stage of the race. But it is so easy around the circuit. Meanwhile, Alvin Manson, I think, going a little bit wide on the exit of 130R. Vitschalk has also brought out the white flag as well. So a couple of compromised lines through the final chicane, and potentially opening up opportunities for those around. Meanwhile, Gert Fischer absolutely glued to the back of the McLaren of Eric Del Fanta, and some interesting inside information, as sometimes the very dedicated viewers in the channel that have been embracing the Pro Series for a long time, doing some very kind and helpful spying over on some of our beloved drivers' streams, and apparently Marco Bischoff already looking on a pretty daunting 3 warnings, and so if he gets one more, that is going to be very difficult in order for him to really be able to commit and push around the lap consistently for the next hour and a quarter. That is not easy to do. So, and whilst admittedly it has been a bit of a theme in the past, he can rack them up fairly quickly. I think even for Marco standards, that is yeah, it's definitely not at the end of the scale that he would have been wanting to be pointing towards. Meanwhile, Tinko van der Velde now 2.3 seconds behind Aiello. Aiello's pace is absolutely fantastic in the opening stage of this race. Really has taken this opportunity with both hands so far, and Tinko just simply unable to match him, which is an unusual comment in itself, and you can tell that Darrow's pace is very good because Marco Bischoff and Karpinen unable to look to follow him along either. So the management right now from Darrow looking very good, a little bit bit of a late squeeze from Niels there. And that forces Korekis to go very deep on the brakes. And as a result, in order to make sure he didn't get a penalty, he has to slot in behind his teammate. And George Boothby, bit by bit, works his way up now towards a P6. We'll see if we can grab that on the replay. From Grantis' perspective, was it a late move into the braking zone from Niels, or did Grantis just get it a little bit wrong? Pulls that left-hand side! And you can see he wasn't expecting that gap to close. Now, of course, you know, on the entry of the corner, it's such a tricky thing with this, because on the entry to the corner, quite clearly at the braking zone, Grantis was not alongside in the slightest. But equally, you could argue that Niels has slightly moved across in that braking zone there and compromised Grantis as a result, where he's had to take evasive action and drop 2 positions in all of that as well. So it is very much something that is, you know, you'll have arguments on both sides, and the stewards will be able to look at it more closely with more camera angles than I can, and will be working hard in the background to look to maybe, hopefully we haven't had too many, but those we have had in the opening part of this race, the stewards will be looking to address fairly shortly. We'll look a little bit back towards the battle inside of the top 5, whilst I just have a little bit of a gander at the penalty sheet so far. And we've seen a 10-second time penalty for the number 30 car. That is Sasha Engel. He was around, I think, Samir Foch when Samir went together, but I definitively did not see any contact, so I don't believe it's for an incident like that, but he did cause a collision, seemingly, on the opening lap. Meanwhile, Omashima now starting, trying to make a move, but you can see straight line speed advantage as well in favour of the SGL Esports McLaren that sits in front of him. Now in towards that chicane. Unable right now to do anything about Swedish driver in front of him. And also, just as another penalty, the only other penalty that's been dished out is a 5-second time penalty for the number 15 car. And that car belongs to, as I switch back towards the battle for the podium, as Carpenter now trying to take a very creative means of lines to see if he can get past Ingo van der Velde, who seems to be struggling more and more as time goes on. And Marco Bischoff is coming back into the frame now as well as they snake around. Dario Emelo smiles with glee as he sees a 3.5-second lead being opened up to between himself and Tinko. But Tinko very much, well, we've seen him hold off one car under constant pressure before. Of course, that was for the race win over at Brands Hatch against George Boothby. How does he cope with the pair of them? Well, one way or another, he's managed to force an error from Teemu Karppinen, who's now got Marco Bischoff in that K-Chroma Racing Esports car to worry about, trying to go all the way around the outside, and that's just never going to work unless he absolutely sets up the best exit. I don't think he is. It's not looking like he's going to be gaining enough overall. So we'll have to wait for another opportunity, and that does suddenly open up that gap just a bit between Teemu Karppinen and Tinko van der Velde. But Tinko, very good at holding position and really stopping any cars from behind, being able to maximise advantages from his mistakes. We saw that on a very frequent basis over at Brands Hatch. I have no doubt he'll be looking to do exactly that again. And flying it down this back stretch as well in towards 130R. Just a 1/10 of a second behind is Valentin Barrier, but he can't seem to get alongside in towards the chicane. The BMW's brakes seem pretty handy, but someone that may be feeling a bit handier for that is Marco Bischoff, who's looking to try to fly down the inside of Teemu Karppinen in towards turn one. Little bit of contact when they get to the turn, as then Karppinen opens up the line before they swing around into the right, but much like we know, he's gone too deep, and unless he gets the momentum back on the exit, I'm not convinced, as he sides left and right around Bischoff, that he is going to be able to make up any positions there. So Teemu Karppinen then drops the time to Tinko van der Velde. Now 1.5 second gap behind Tinko. So that certainly alleviates the pressure from the young Dutchman. But now he's got a new type of pressure. He's got the 2-time Pro Series champion, who is looking very, very speedy at this stage of the race. Maybe not quite Aimello levels of speedy, but certainly speedy enough indeed to very much bring himself into the fight for P2, let alone maybe the fight for P1 as well. Still nothing on the weather front, so we'll have to see how that all plays out. Also, just noticed a comment in the chat about Twitch being down, and I don't know if that's something wrong with the stream. So if it is anything that is wrong, then do let me know, and I shall try to get onto that and fix it as best as I can. Meanwhile, Vanzine then still in hot pursuit of Gert Fischer in the BMW's head up to Spoon Curve, as that is Jonathan Clifford. And Renault Coutts, I think that was down at the hairpin. So will we see a Kobayashi-like style dive from Jonathan Clifford? And he's actually quite way behind this scrap pin. You can see that was Renault Coutts battling up ahead with Luca Wieninger. It's going to look to go down the inside. And there's contact at the apex, and the Audi doesn't come off very well from it. Jonathan Clifford said, thank you very much, everybody, and gets the position. He tried, but it looks for it also get the additional position from the recovering Audi as well, but couldn't quite manage it inside the Lamborghini. Meanwhile, at the front of the field, 4 seconds now is the gap between Dario and Tinko, as they look to try to stretch their legs and pull away from the rest of the pack, and then they can get themselves redialed in to their own races and focus on what is going to work out best for them. But I Am Low certainly so far has risen to the occasion, delivering 2 fantastic qualifyings in succession, and now finds himself with an over 4-second gap to the winningest driver so far of Season 11. It's a fantastic effort from him. Meanwhile, Korekas applying the pressure to his teammate. Of course, he lost the position after a rather compromised line in a previous fight, so now it's all about recovery stage. Meanwhile, George Boothby in hot pursuit of Niels Narks. Those are 2 names which, if you have followed the world of SRO esports, you'll be very familiar with those cars. Frequent competitors, and of course George Boothby, most notably your most recent SRO GT Sprint champion. So a man that is very quick behind the wheel and can really look to put together a fantastic race. Meanwhile, Clifford and Coutts seeming to scrap a little bit further. As you can see, that looks like Clifford now having to go defensive over the Estonian of Renault Coutts, but he can't quite keep him behind, at least for now. In fact, he can. I thought McLaren was going to send it a bit earlier than that. So you think surely not into the second part of the Spoon Curve, and in the end he doesn't. He hasn't quite got the confidence in the front end of that car that it's going to stick. Meanwhile, somebody's looking very, very racy. George Boothby gaining 2 positions already for the number 4 car, and maybe about to make that just another one to his name. That's the wrong camera angle view. There's the one that I wanted. You can see it's BMW being reeled in by the second, but just not quite enough to open up an opportunity down in towards the first corner. And instead, he will have to hang back for just a moment. As meanwhile, Renault Coutts trying to gain in the slipstream of Jonathan Clifford. Now he thinks about pulling out for an overtake down the inside, and he hasn't run it too deep. And in the end, a very smart, tidy and clean move from Renault Coutts to get the job done there. Meanwhile, Jardier versus Noah Eder are scrapping away for P15. Jardier right now looking like the aggressor of the 2. Last lap was a 59.8. Whereas Noah Eder's was a 10th down. So not ideal, not the biggest margin in the world. Of course, slipstream very likely to be playing into effect on that front as well, but still not a particularly nice feeling of him to be taking forward. Meanwhile, what would be a nice feeling is if Walsingham could join his fellow Ferrari Veloce cars in 6th, 7th and potentially 8th place as he now heads up Spoon Curve, and he has had the torque, the power of that V10 to drop the Ferrari of Vignoli behind. So now does in fact make it 6, 7 and 8 for the Ferrari for the Veloce Esports car, although I have to say Vignoli not looking like he's entirely done yet. Surely doesn't try anything onto the McLaren at this stage. It doesn't look like he can. As a fact, Adam Spansky may be in a position to do something about the number 6 Ferrari, but in the end, just completely unable to. Someone, though, that got the move done by the looks of it was Jardier, although he may come under a little bit of pressure on the run down towards the first turn. We'll have to see. Try to make sure we also don't miss too much of the replay. But the number 3 car has made his way through, and Jardier, I think, will retain on to the spot. So let's see. Can we catch what happens there? See, side by side already through 130R, and in actual fact, far less interesting in the end than we thought it might be, because Norita just conceding the position, making sure that was all highlighted in the end. Also, completely forgot to go over to the replay overlay. Apologies on that front, but some swapping of position between Del Fanta, Vignoli, and Spansky as well. So we'll keep an eye on what happened there. We'll try and see, in actual fact, if we can immediately have a little bit of a gander at the fights that took place. So that's where it all started. Adam Spansky went around the outside of Vignoli. Vignoli then dropped a bunch of pace on the exit of the next apex, and I think it's just smart racing that's left to the double drop in position. Smart racing from Del Fanta and Spansky to make use of that compromise line from the Ferrari 296, and currently now finds himself down in towards the P11 spot for that, which, considering he started inside the top 6, not really fantastically ideal for the Ferrari driver, but thankfully has managed to still kind of stay around the fight. So, you know, when we get to the elements of strategy, maybe as the tyres start to wear further on as well, maybe that Ferrari will start to be more competitive. We haven't got too much of a baseline to go on that one. Meanwhile, very good line out of the final corner from Renault Kutzen as he looks to go down the inside of Luca Viniga, but that Audi V10 just a little bit too much horsepower in order for the McLaren to surmount a challenge. As he fair through 130 hours, pretty even between the two of them, and still, as soon as he comes out of that slipstream, there's just nothing that he can do to fight off the raw horsepower of the Audi. It did look like a little bit screwy exit actually for the pair of them. I was initially just going to say for the Audi, which we were suspecting maybe suffering with some tyre degradation at the moment. I mean, the lap time certainly would reflect that, but you would think that Vignoli may have a slightly better opportunity to execute his pace, and we'll see how he gets on. Meanwhile, checking in on the fight for P8, then we've got Walsingham ahead of Adam Spansky and Eric Del Fanta as they now make the way up towards the hairpin. And we certainly definitely do have action, but I do agree, I like us holding station a little bit more than we are used to here in the Pro Series. And Dario Iamolo absolutely pacing around the circuit at the moment. 59.2 on the last lap, a solid 0.6 of a second slower than his personal best so far in the race. But he is still lapping around 0.7 of a second faster, if not more at times, than a lot of the cars that are further behind in this grid. So he is really finding some fantastic stuff right now. Meanwhile, at the front of the grid, Marco Bischoff was keeping an eye on the Delta in the corner of my eye. It looks very close between those two. Same could also be said, oh, that was a bit laggy or maybe mistaken. Not quite sure. It's difficult to tell, actually, whether that was an issue for Marco Bischoff. Fancy barrier close up to the back of Gert Fischer, as is Omashima to the back of Albin Manson. He can't do anything about that for the time being. A lot of drivers just struggling to make progress in the field. It does look like you've got the likes of Bischoff, Boothby, Spansky maybe to a certain extent, and Valentin Barrier that just kind of seems somewhat out of position. Look like they are trying to move forward and make some progress, but a lot of drivers just run out unable to kind of find the opportunities to make use of that. And they'll probably be quite pleased based on that, that we are less than halfway through this race, coming up towards the half an hour mark. And whilst a lot of significant battles and a couple of elements of chaos and tragedy, not quite the same explosive level of action that we are quite often used to seeing here in the Pro Series, as more and more people looking to follow the channel. Almost at 375. How fantastic is that? In fact, when the counter updates, there's a very good chance we may even be on it. So a big welcome and thank you to all of those. Could we even make our way over to 400 followers at the end of the evening? That's a challenge I shall leave you all with. We, of course, will be here for an extra 30 minutes, so maybe there's a chance that could happen. And we shall have to wait and see. Meanwhile, Marco Bischoff then at the front, still unable to do anything about Tinko van der Velde, who holds on strong in that P2 spot. As Teemu Karppinen, not the finest of pace, he was a little bit up and down at the moment. He was fastest of this trio on the last lap, but definitely lost out some pace over the previous couple. So it's not consistent for some of these drivers. And what that usually tends to be down to is not that they are inconsistent in themselves, but that the drivers around them are pushing them to such an extent that in order to stick with them, that they're having to go beyond a little bit of what they would actually be comfortable on. And a lot of time, that is the inherent thing that separates the very best of the drivers that are dialed in the most when it comes to preparation with the car, the setup, the feeling around the circuit, who's able to really hook it up and get it dialed in for the race, and those that may have the pace from time to time versus that kind of outright robotic consistency. And with the way that the lap times are coming in right now, I am low, definitely looking at the latter. 59.2 on the last lap, and just no one else is even close in that sort of territory. That is astonishing pace. We're seeing a lot of 0.6s from the likes of Niels Narks, George Boothby, Karekas, but after that, everyone from 9th place onwards, with exception to Vignoli, who is struggling to make progress for other reasons with the kind of bounce of his car by the looks of it. Those are the only cars in this entire grid that are still lapping within the 2-minute marker point. So, yeah, definitely some astonishing pace demonstrated from Dario there. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. Meanwhile, Valentin sends one up the inside of Gert Fischer. We'll try to catch a replay of this, but it looks like they finally got the move done, and they're starting to figure out how to make use of that chicane in the best way that they can, but he is now going to have to go defensive on the BMW of Gert Fischer. As we look at the wrong diffuser, they make their way in towards Spoon Curve now to try to see who's going to come out on top. There's a little bit of contact on the entry there. Thankfully manages to avoid any sort of further incident between the two. My goodness, that was very close between Gert Fischer and Valentin there. But I think the McLaren is going to get the job done. I do want to look on the replay, but I'm very conscious that Vignoli also trying to apply the pressure onto Eric Del Fanta, of course, last week's race winner. And whilst a somewhat inherited victory, definitely, can be praised enough for sort of pace and performance that he put in. Meanwhile, George Boothby trying to get to the inside line from that BMW, but he can't quite get around the outside either, trying to see if he can go for a cutback. But Niels, he's so smart in these situations, very rarely makes a mistake at the best of times, but he really does start to shine. That wealth of experience inside the cockpit of that BS Plus competition car does very much come to fruition in the best way possible when he is in these racing situations. And whilst George Boothby quite clearly is a rather veteran himself now of the LFM platform, racing here on ACC and all of that that this series has to offer, that still there is something that you can always be looking to learn, and Niels' brain certainly has the characteristics almost of a sponge. It very much just sucks up any information that it comes across. To answer a question in the chat, so this is the top split, and this top split had an ELO of so we'll try to see. I'm having to full screen here for just a moment. And the ELO was about 5,500 between these guys. So you can tell there's really not much between them in all of that. And of course we do have some minimum requirements. Hopefully nothing that's too difficult for drivers to crack on with, so they can get themselves ready, dialed in for some championship competition here at LFM. But yeah, the top split having the narrowest range of skills in there, very much being in the upper end of the scale. We do, of course, have the likes of Karekas, Marco Bischoff, and a few other drivers that have some of those very high-level licenses they work very hard for. Of course, Marco Bischoff, you may notice, is the #1 man in the server. And that #1 on his plate is not just for decoration, it's also not to indicate that he is the reigning champion. It is to show that on the LFM platform, he is rated as the #1 driver. That was a title that originally stood with Trevor Wenham. And then gradually, Karekas, bit by bit, made his way up through the field and started to challenge that, and very much has now, he held on to that title for a long time, and very much earned himself a reputation that, even carries across now, despite his slightly weaker form over the last few weeks, where, last season especially, he was absolutely mighty. As does Lamborghini think about go on this occasion? He's showing the nose, but Tinko, he's a bit too wise for that, and he'll just let Marco Bischoff compromise his line. Hold up Tinko a little bit. Hold up Timu a little bit in the process, and look to maximise the exits. No harm done or time lost yet for the Audi or the two Lamborghinis that sit behind them. Meanwhile, Dario extending his lead to 7.5 seconds as we just hit the 55-minute mark in this race. So 35 minutes of racing have gone by, and now we have open opportunity for pit stops over the course of the next 20 minutes. And exactly the thought I was going to go down. Will some of these drivers look to go for an undercut? The undercut theoretically should be relatively powerful around here, especially in the first sector, and maybe also commitment into 130R. But it's not as likely to be as inherently pace determining, shall we say, than certain other factors. We'll have to see on that front. I think Omashima's just lost the position to Renault Kuts. Not ideal for a Japanese driver. Really would have expected him to be a bit further up, but currently still sits in P17 for the time being. Make up P16 as Gert Fischer now makes his pit stop. Imelo and Van der Velde continue to effectively be your best of the rest, but Carpenter, Narks and George Boothby all very much in tow for this battle, all the way from P2 down to P6. So we'll have to see how that plays out. We'll also have to check in on Gert Fischer and see whereabouts he emerges from the pit lane, because that can also be a very important element as well. You can have the most optimal strategy in the world, but we see this time and time again in endurance races too, that if you are trying to put yourself in a position in the long game that is going to play into your benefit, it doesn't always work out so well if you then come out immediately in traffic, because then you can't execute the initial lap times when your tyres are at their freshest to really build upon what you kind of want out of that. And that's the advantage of the overcut. Going extremely long, pushing it all the way to the other end of the spectrum really does enable you to kind of focus on just that latter portion of the race. But if you're a circuit like Suzuka, where it does look like the overtaking is a little bit on the tricky side, and that we're seeing it being inherently difficult for some of these drivers to end up making some moves, that undercut strategy is a very easy way in relative terms of execution in order to promote those chances. So we could see some drivers have a go at that. And I haven't quite given up on the weather just yet. We have 52 minutes remaining. We only know the weather for the next 30 minutes. Admittedly, it is looking fairly weak and unlikely that we'll have any sense of variability, but I'm still hopeful that we may have some rain. As there we go, there's our first pitter from inside the top 10, Aidan Walsingham comes in now. Of course, the likes of Gert Fischer have already come into the pits. Jan Drexler's in there. I think Renault Kuts is in there as well. But in terms of our lead bunch, Aidan Walsingham, the first driver to come in then. And of course, the one compulsory stop for these guys. Once they've done that stop, as long as it is inside the pit window, then they are free to conduct the rest of the race however they please. But that compulsory window just prevents those occasions, opportunities where extending a stint all the way to the end on one set of tyres from the very beginning don't quite work on that front. So now we'll have to see how all of that plays out. Meanwhile, Marco Bischoff still very much trying to hang on to the back of Tinko van der Velde. More drivers coming into the pits. That is Simonov and Luca Wieninger. And Timo Carpenter has somewhat dropped away now from Bischoff and van der Velde. Meanwhile, Walsingham, that is just him exiting the pit lane. I'm sure he gets himself away very nicely. No dramas as he re-enters the racetrack for the first time in what can feel like quite an age sometimes in the pits. Very much, a fairly lengthy pit lane, but when you sit there, have 30 seconds to wait for the stop as well, it can very much be quite a time-consuming activity, and it sometimes does get you out of that rhythm. You'll see teams, especially in endurance categories, quite often double stint, not because the net benefits of a tyre is best. Obviously, very detrimental to try to take a single set for such a long distance, but if you are in a good groove, it does open up opportunities for that driver to really maximise the pace and opportunities that they may likely have. Meanwhile, other drivers have come into the pits. That is Adam Spansky that has made their way in now in the Audi number 5 car that hasn't quite shown the level of pace that maybe we would have hoped or expected around here. Tinko, of course, started P3. Del Fante is very much up there or thereabouts, but just not to the extent that we have come to expect the Polish driver to find himself in, because he has been pushing Tinko all the way along in qualifying trim as of late. And on a couple of occasions, did look like he may be the faster of the two, but Tinko just does typical Tinko things and manages to find that bit of extra pace and go that bit faster. Right now, he's just going a smidge too fast as well for Mr. Carpenter, for Mr. Bischoff, who cannot make his way by in that K-Chrome Racing Esports Lamborghini. So 2 V10s roar their way up. In actual fact, let's go on board with the rear diffuser of the Audi. You hear that V10 thundering its way up the hill. And this will be when he really lets it rip. As more drivers coming out of the pit lane now do need to keep an eye also on this, because Aidan Walsingham only 0.2 of a second behind Adam Spansky, so making some potential moves and opportunities with that immediate response to his pit strategy. As more and more of you continuing to join, such a pleasure to have you all here, everybody. I gather there's also been some other shenanigans with the stream even since our initial fix. So welcome back to all of those I do believe may have temporarily dropped out. So it's fantastic for you to all be tuning in as we continue to progress our way almost towards the halfway mark of this race, as both Marco Bischoff and Niels Narks come into the pits to get a fresh set of boots on their cars, and seeing how they can look to try to engage that additional grip into the second stint and try to reel in those in front of them and gain some positions out of it. Now, of course, in Niels' case, he very much is just trying to kind of get out of key slipstream territory by doing this. He wants to cement track position and try to open up the gap as much as he can, but within reason, hopefully, stretch out that kind of that slipstream effect to a point where it's not really adding too much in the way for these McLarens. So I have to see how it takes place for him, but more and more drivers coming into the pits. Walsingham absolutely glued to the back of Adam Spansky as they make their way in towards the Casio Triangle. That was a mistake for the Polish driver, and does this open up an opportunity as Marco Bischoff is on the way out of the pits now as well. Number 9 car gaining to a certain degree in slipstream. In actual fact, he's not even gaining by the time they make their way to the left-hand side of the circuit, and there is Niels just up ahead of them. So Niels Narks just 1.7 seconds ahead of Adam Spansky, and I really feel like that was not, or that is a bigger gap than it was when they started. So, or excuse me, a narrower gap. I mean to say. So we'll have to see whether or not Spansky can look to put those tyres into good effect. Maybe bring Walsingham along for the ride and see if the pair of them can catch up to Niels. But definitely something that is for certain is that Dario Iemolo absolutely driving at his best at the moment. He showed us exactly what he was capable of over one lap of Misano. It all went wrong in the race, but he still very nearly recovered it to a victory. Now he is over in Japan. Pole position, has led every lap of this race so far, and now is looking to try to get his first race win. Of course, that is sometimes something that these drivers can, will tend to experience a little bit of pressure on as well, and can be a difficult one to execute as well as the other impact. But right now he is doing a fine job. As some of our other contenders coming into the pits of Boothby, we've got Karekas, Tinko all in there as well. Tinko now on the move, so we'll see whereabouts he comes out. See the car bumping its way along the pit lane. Not quite as bad as Snetterton in that regard, as I found out. That was that was as if I'm driving the car up a set of stairs, but just some very long tarmac stairs. But definitely one of the bumpier pit lanes on the calendar. And crucially for Tinko, despite the undercut strategy from Marco Bischoff, that he has come out in front. Now the only question is, how quickly can he get those tyres fired up, and how quickly can Marco Bischoff push in order to get this overtake? This is possibly his best opportunity right here, right now, as he's absolutely glued to the back of the Lamborghini, making the way towards Dunlop Curve now as he heads onto the throttle to gain over the crest. Getting in the slipstream, you can see opportunities now, maybe. Oh, he's got to be so close. Not running to the back of Tinko there. It does look like Tinko's got some minor desyncing, but thankfully not enough to lead to any sort of harm or contact. There's these two continuing to scrap inside the top 10. Marco Bischoff trying to send one on the inside of Tinko. He's wise to it. He only defends as much as he needs. If he defends any more than that, then he starts to compromise his line on exit. And all Niels then has to do is roll out the car a little bit wider, make sure he's on the power early, and especially with the sort of run that you can get on the slipstream as well if you are behind up the hill towards Spoon, very much does present itself as a potential chance at an overtake. Meanwhile, more people coming into the pits. So we have Vinoli, Jardier, Barrier, and Delfanto, and also Vitshoka as well. So a lot of drivers starting to make their pit stops around the halfway mark. Whether or not those that went that bit earlier, when we were very much on the kind of opening portion of that pit window opening, whether or not that's going to have any detrimental effects for these cars later in the race, we'll have to wait and see. That is also something that you very much end up having to consider overall. It's also worth noting that Carpenter is currently 13 seconds behind Dario Iemolo, so that really goes to show the level of pace he's doing. He's just on 59.3 on the last lap, and his best lap is a 59.1. The level of consistency from this man is extremely high. As I got worried for a second. I thought the two sister cars had come together. Thankfully, Valentine and Jardier end up escaping pretty easily in the end, as not really much in the way of traffic. The other flags playing a bit more havoc than they needed to, but it is rather alarming when you see the quite a big swarm of them, as white flag was briefly out for Marco Bischoff. Now, does that mean that he's made a mistake on this lap? He's still pretty much at the same gap he was a couple of laps ago to Bischoff, maybe be a bit larger than it was. But as Iemolo now finally comes into the pits, so he decided he doesn't want to push it out too far in terms of the overcut strategy. He doesn't need to risk it. He doesn't need to make any moves. It's very unlikely, as long as he delivers similar kind of pace to what he did in the first stint, it's very unlikely that he will even have to be too much on the defensive side. So having those fresh tyres around the halfway point of the race, a little bit further on, is actually likely be quite beneficial to him. And we'll see how powerful the undercut has been for these two, as Marco was looking pretty quick. So of course was Tinko, but I'm not sure that they were quick enough to completely take down the advantage of what Iamalo had. Iamalo coming out of the pits now, and yet you can see absolutely plenty of time to himself, and this scrap for what will be the fight for P3 potentially, maybe P2. We'll have to see how it all plays into effect, because if these guys do start to scrap, we could see Karppinen soaring his way through the order as well, for all we know. He wasn't too far away from this fight, and he has stayed out in clean air. He'll be getting fresher tyres and undercut power from these drivers, 59 sixes from a few of them, versus what right now are mid twos, so 2-minute lap times. With the advantage that we've seen, I don't imagine that's going to reshuffle these drivers around too much. But later on in the race, could very much see opportunities for Karppinen on the horizon to get stuck into this one as well. Also, Iamalo, in actual fact, has gained 8 seconds now over Tinko van Velde. Of course, he's probably looking a bit more backwards than usual, which is great for Marco Bischoff, because it's about time that he sort of, rather than being a little bit in no man's land to some extent, really sustaining the pressure on to the very best that we have in this grid. And Tinko, certainly throughout this season, I think has arguably been the benchmark on that front, as Karppinen and Hagstrom Viggerslew also come into the pits as well, as they're just 4.5 minutes left to go, and I do believe they are our last pitters. So they will restore the order in just a moment, and we'll keep an eye and see whereabouts is Karppinen going to emerge outside the pits. We'll also have to have a bit of a gander over the stewarding sheet as well, see if anything's happened there. And, it was going well up until a point. There was a lot of no further actions. And then we've got a 10-second time penalty for the number 30. As Karppinen just gets going away now. And you can see he is going to be a little bit far away from the likes of Bischoff and Tinko. Not sure if that quite worked out for him, but we'll have to see what the pace advantage is on those fresher tyres. As number 30 car has a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision. That belongs to... I'm not sure. I think they may have left the session. Part of me thinks it could be for Bailey Thompson. No, excuse me, it's for Sasha Engel. He is in the session. He's just unfortunately at the very back. So I didn't quite catch him to start with. So Sasha for Druck TV Racing, the DTVR team, unfortunately have come a little bit unstuck and got themselves a 10-second time penalty. We've got warnings going out for the 17 and also the number 14 car as well for reckless driving. So not often we see warnings being handed out for penalties quite like that. Number 14 though, that is Valentine. And then the number 17 is Renault Coupe. So two cars are still in the server with us, pushing on and seeing what they can do. Sometimes drivers have a pretty good idea of penalties and kind of what's happening around them, but equally it may not always be too clear. In fact, their overlay does have a little bit more info than us, that they can at least see things like drive-thrus and stuff like that. So sometimes the information is relatively easy to acquire, or they may have someone talking in their ear, not just for the fun of it, but to make sure that they are tuned into the race as best as they can. Your closest fight on circuit at the moment is this for P2 between Tinko and Marco, with a lot of O's in the names of these, because we've got Dario, Tinko and Marco inside your podium positions right now. and Imola continuing to look like he is pulling away. May even look to turn down the pace a little bit as time goes on. But as at least for right now, he is pushing on and going a solid 10.5 quicker than, make a quarter of a second quicker than anyone else, really. But whether or not that advantage will be maintained until the end, we'll have to wait and see. We know how good Marco and Tinko are, and especially if they work together to an extent. Maybe if Dario makes a mistake, that gap of 8.5 seconds becomes a greater opportunity. But Marco continuing to try to summon up the inside into the hairpin, open up an opportunity under braking. But Tinko van der Velde having absolutely nothing about it. I don't know if it was flashing the headlights there from Marco Bischoff to indicate that he wasn't necessarily too happy about that. But at least from my rather limited perspective, it looked okay. I didn't see Marco get fully alongside. He was quite clearly trying to occupy that sort of area of the track, and he was given the room. But equally then, Tinko was in control of what the line for the exit was, having been on the outer line, and the next corner being the long right-hander of 200R up the hill. So it's a bit tricky to determine on that front, but right now at least we are looking towards our scrap for P2 of Tinko van der Velde and Marco Bischoff, the two-time Pro Series champion. And let's go on board, shall we, with said champion, as it is V10 on V10 again, trying to see if oh, that was very close, running into the back of Tinko there. I think narrowly avoided any further contact, but I think it will be a handy-dandy time to give the replay just a little bit of an inspection. So as we let's see, I think maybe if we go helicam, we've actually maybe got the best chance of looking at it from this perspective. So heading down towards the first turn then, and closing, but just to back out of it eventually, and as a result actually understeers a little bit through the first corner entirely, but keeps it all together and carries on for another opportunity and another lap. Imola still putting in fantastic lap times. A new fastest lap from him of 58.6. He is 0.6 of a second clear of anyone except for Grant Krekas, who was only 59.0 as of that last lap. So very impressive stuff from him there. But again, just not the greatest amount of time in order for him to move any further forward. But we shall see how it plays out. 9 seconds now the gap between first and second place, with Tinko just half a second ahead of Marco Bischoff, keeping a little bit of a close eye on the likes of Adam Spansky versus Eric Del Fanta for the fight for P8, whilst we have the likes of Walsingham and Vignoli battling around P10. Valentin Barry maybe setting up an opportunity perhaps on Gert Fischer. We've seen these two go toe-to-toe already on a couple of occasions, trying to go around the outside at 130 yards. Surely not going to do that. In fact, he doesn't have to wait for another opportunity, but immediately goes on the attack around the outside. The Frenchman goes barely a car's width left on the outside line. The BMW jumping over the curb, very happy to do so, and eats the curb on the exit as well. And Gert Fischer holds on to the place for the time being, but you would have to expect that McLaren is going to be closing thick and fast on the run in towards turn one. But no, straight on speed of that BMW, good enough to just keep that McLaren of Barrier at bay. There's nothing that he can do about it. Almost contact between the pair of them on the exit of the second apex, and it's bit by bit allowing Jardier. You see his sort of silhouette. There he is, just popping in and out from the background. Currently slightly obscured by Valentin at the in the main front and centre portion of this camera. Oh, there was an opportunity that was looked for from Valentin. It is one that sometimes can work very well, but on this occasion, what about Matteo Vignoli, who after dropping to P11 haven't really been able to move any further forward as a result, and I think that's fundamentally not due to lack of inherent pace. He's lapping in the 59s at the moment, which is great stuff from the Italian driver, but just tends to be that he's a little bit limited in straight line speed, getting busy behind the BMW of Fischer, as Jardier getting progressively more and more involved as well. As we go on board, in actual fact, with this number 3 car, heading up the hill. Oh, the crest. Is he going to witness his teammate sending one on the inside? And he is, but there's contact. And Jardier now trying to see, can he send one up the inside of Gert Fischer? They're side by side on the exit of the Spoon. One McLaren's gone through. Will it be 2? It's very close on the exit. Jardier is going to get the slipstream from his teammate. And that will help him close in and try to see if he can get across in time. It's still going to be side by side. Gert Fischer trying to do it. Oh, Johnny, the massive slide! And that's the sort of talent that man has in the cockpit. Hasn't managed to quite gel with that car on the way this season that we would have kind of maybe expected from previous form. Of course, a multiple race winner in this series. But that goes to demonstrate the fact that, he's very smiley, but he is very competitive and he is very much on it in terms of car control. Watch this as we head through Spoon Curve. I don't know if it was just the curb. Was there contact? Oh, just as he went through that dip. And he manages to just about hold on to that one. And that was a very close moment. It even manages to make the apex of the next chicane. Jardier take a bow. And somehow in all of that takes a position as well. So, yes, definitely definitely an 11 out of 10 Tokyo Drift moment. I'll definitely approve of that one. But, yeah, good job that man to hold on to that one. And I'm not sure that he would have been smiling and laughing his way through that. Usually, there was probably a small, slightly hysterical laughter afterwards. Usually when there's a scary moment, that is the way that Mr. Honzik does tend to handle such situations. So we'll see if that makes it into a compilation anytime soon. What has happened to George Boothby? I've got a horrible feeling I might know. It's a very weird place on the circuit to have an issue. But I think he may have clipped the bumps and the curb on the run up the inside. I've just covered up my screen with completely the wrong thing. I can't see the stream. That's not helping me in the slightest. I think, has he caught the bumps and the curb on the right-hand side here and sent the car flying? I think it's this last one. No, he's just completely slowed down there. Korekis has gone flying on by. Hasn't seemingly lost any more time to his teammate. Just looking at the deltas in our current timing window, he's lost 3 seconds, but what's happened to George Boothby there? I've absolutely no idea. Whether or not if there's any of my wonderful, fantastic helpers that are in the chat sometimes do some spying elsewhere. I wonder if you may be able to find out for me. But a very weird issue, and quite a costly one potentially as well, because it's not, even though he is technically topping the championship in terms of overall points, it is not a happy place realistically, because Tinko looking trying like he's going to get a P2 unless Marco Bischoff has something to say about it. And George Boothby currently in P6, with those drop scores playing into effect. Is George going slowly again? I don't think so. We'll go on board. It sounds like he may be on pace again, but it just sounds a bit, I don't know, it just sounds a little bit lackluster, but maybe it's okay. But apparently he has some wheel issues, which are not particularly helpful. But it did allow Grant Korekis to get a very nice freebie and up into P5. He's completely kind of put aside the comments I made before this race, and good on him. I want to see him at this level again. He's the reigning champion. And, we saw going into this season, we know how good he is over one lap in the race, how consistent he can be, and very much wanting to see him in the constant fights for wins, but it just hasn't really gone that way. And apparently it was actually a shifting issue, so couldn't actually change gear. Oh, that is very unfortunate for George. So hopefully he has got that issue fixed now, but definitely not what you want in the middle of a race. And Whilst, drop scores-wise, this probably wouldn't have been one of the races, I think, that would have counted towards this tally anyway, considering where he was on target for. If we think about the bottom 2 positions, the problem is we don't know what's going to happen next 3 races. If you have 2, for want of a better word, clangers, as Jardier brings out the white flag for a moment, maybe ran a little bit wide on the exit 130R, but nothing too dramatic by the looks of it. If you have 2 absolute clangers of results for the next couple of races, that's your drop scores over and done with. Or, these drivers, whilst they do put in a tremendous amount of effort into practicing for these races, and they're competing for some pretty fantastic prizes as well, they do have kind of other commitments and things, and sometimes they may just simply not be able to make a race. Jardier had some rather poor excuse about having to do something at the Nordschleife, if I remember rightly, a terrible reason as far as I'm concerned. Pro Series much more important, but sometimes these things do get in the way, and that then is going to skew your results automatically, so you can't necessarily bank on hoping that things are going to go your way later on. You need to keep on getting in these good results, and that's why you can really never tell where this championship sits up until the final race of the season, because only then do we have all the information at hand as to how it's going to play out. And even then, last season when it went down between Huben and Karekis at the final race, it was still a very tricky scenario to work out who was actually going to come out on top there. And I think initially, if I recall, Mac may or may not have called it wrong to start with, as some recalculations showed that it did go the fact that way off the Lithuanians. So it very much is about consistency. Ultimately, obviously, you want to be up there as high as you possibly can every single race, but just banking in those points, the margins between position to position isn't too severe. So as long as you can still score decently, it's not going to end your hopes. But with fine margins in such a tightly packed grid, it can very much start to catch up on you by the time you get to the end of this championship. Meanwhile, 25 minutes left to go. Gap between Bischoff and Van der Velde has opened up a tad. I say that's immediately come back down to half a second. But last week's race winner looking pretty handy in the McLaren, trying to make some progress in the number 11 McLaren. Unable to do so at the moment. But what about Matteo Vignoli? Actually, got very close to Walsingham on the entry to the first turn, but couldn't quite do anything about the McLaren there. So we've got a couple of scraps taking place, and I think this is a pretty good opportunity to have a bit of a gander at this little statistic there. So you can see our top 4 as they were at the start of this race. George and Grantus, despite the wheel issue for Mr. Boothby, have actually both gained 3 positions respectively. Biggest mover on the grid by the looks of it may in fact be Nico Penman further down the order, up to 24th. I do believe, though, that we've lost about 6 cars, so perhaps not quite the most representative. I think similar scenario for Clifford, Simonov, all of that. So I think the McLaren's actually almost in the same team of Jardier, George and Grantus, perhaps your biggest kind of true movers through the field. As we check on board a scrap for 21st position. It's what we love about the Pro Series and the LFM platform, is that other than me getting completely the wrong graphic together, that the racing up and down the grid, it doesn't matter where you are in the field, the way that the ranking system works means that you are always in for a fight. There will be someone for you to battle against, and ultimately, whether you're battling for the win or you're having the hardest racing of your life down in 22nd position, you can still have so much fun. Going toe-to-toe with anyone on a race circuit, personally, at least for me, when you head down in battle and your entire focus is just on trying to beat that one person that's around you, it fades into oblivion sometimes as to what that actually is particularly for. Meanwhile, Andrzej Spansky is still being pursued very closely by Eric Del Fanta, as also, Mr. Fisher, I do believe, has a drive-through penalty for corner cutting, because that is quite clearly not a scheduled pit stop. So after all of the fighting with Valentine that we saw earlier on, and Jardier as well, unfortunately the West Competition Racing car, and I think also maybe not for the first time this season, sadly, has rather taken himself out of contention. I think he did the same at Imola, if memory serves correctly, and unfortunately now finds his way all the way down in 19th position, so big disappointment there for Dutchman. Still 22 minutes on the clock to try to regain some of that time and advantage, but certainly not what he would have wanted to do. Meanwhile, side by side, Michael Frey and Igor Simonov through the first couple of corners, but the Porsche hung out to dry. And you see the amount of camber that is on the inside of that corner. That's why it's so tricky to go around the outside there. You have to have a massive overlap on the first entry. Otherwise, you're just never really in a strong place to go side by side, and you always be the one that gets pushed out across. Not even so much by your competitor, but just by the curvature of the track. A very undulating circuit. Suzuka. It's very much a sort of a Japanese tarmac roller coaster, if you want to think of it that way. It does look like, sadly, no rain on the agenda for the rest of this race, which is rather disappointing, but nevertheless, because we have still racing action going on now, primarily between Vignoli and Walsingham. See if the Ferrari can try and make his way back inside the top 10. Of course, had a pretty strong qualifying, lost out in the first lap, and has struggled a little bit for pace. Mistake, though, from Walsingham, but also not the best exit from Vignoli. So I think the McLaren may be safe on this occasion. We'll check in with the Ferrari. And yeah, you can see the gap not closing any further. It is gaining a little bit, so the slipstream is providing some level of effect. But he's going to need to be a lot tighter to the rear diffuser of that McLaren in the closing stages if he wants to make a move. You see, though, this is where he starts to reel in that car. Both of these new additions to ACC have very good aero packages on board, but the Ferrari definitely, much like its predecessor, is kind of rather the king of downforce and aerodynamics overall. So that first sector very, very much in favour of that one. Meanwhile, Marco Bischoff has lined up an opportunity, trying to go for a cutback onto Tinko. Hasn't made it stick. How is it going to fare on the run up the hill? We'll go on board the rear diffuser of Tinko van der Velde, who seems to be struggling a little bit. Dario Emelo leads this race by 12 seconds, but Marco Bischoff continuing to hunt around the back of this Audi. And George Busby will be desperately hoping that these two do swap positions, because anything that reduces the points tally of this number 7 car will certainly be to his benefit. Down in towards 130. I don't want to be making a move there, surely, and he does back out. Backs out quite considerably in the end. He hasn't helped himself in order to try to get a run towards the first corner. Unfortunately, Mr. Fisher had a drive-through. So yeah, unfortunately, corner cutting warnings, of which we know Marco Bischoff is also in a similar kind of status at the moment on a knife edge with that one, as will Vignoli running very wide on exit 130R. That will likely be almost contact, what that actually was. Let's see if we can grab a replay of all of that, because that was a very interesting couple of corners for the Ferrari driver. We'll go on board. See, gaining in the slipstream on the run down, even though this car absolutely oodles of downforce, quite clearly technical terms only, here on the LFM broadcast. And we head into 130R, just runs a little bit wide, just has to really force the nose of the car to come through, and then just brakes. Oh my goodness, that was astonishingly close to contact, and the fact there wasn't any more was, I'm sure, a big sigh of relief for Aidan Walsingham. But I think that may be the end of Vignoli's bet, or bid rather, trying to get into the top 10. Meanwhile, Del Fanta, last week's winner, trying to get past Adam Spansky still for P8. Marco Bischoff applying the pressure for P2. And then further down the order, Onmashima versus Manson still ranging on. That's been a fight that's been kicking off for quite a while. As is Oliver Hagstrom versus Noah Ida as well, who hasn't had, unfortunately, a great deal of pace. Had good pace at Misano, but just didn't really have the execution in the race in order to really tie that all together and get a good result in that Mercedes. So I have to see how he fares in the future. Of course, we will be finishing the season over at Bathurst, a circuit that is renowned for being Mercedes territory. So maybe he can do something special there, and what a place it would be to do something special. We've seen the likes of Florian Duacop in the past. As Tinko brings out the white flag, that will give Marco Bischoff perhaps a little bit of hope, but the gap still pretty much the same. So we'll have to see how it all plays out. But yeah, Florian gave us one of the most dramatic race finishes in the Pro Series that we've ever had. I believe in season 8 or 9, if memory serves. And yeah, that was a very interesting end to that one. Penultimate lap, leading the race by about 25 seconds along that sort of line. He was very comfortable, and then came over the crest in towards Skyline, flew off into the barrier, did a 360, whole front suspension was caved in. Meanwhile, Oliver Hagstrom, I think, has just sent it down the inside of Noah Reeder, and has really put a lesson on the K Kramer Racing esports driver. Let's go on board with the McLaren. We know that it's being a car that's got pretty handy straight line speed, and Mercedes initially has the grunt advantage as the confidence through 130. I did say we've seen Mercedes go flying off in the past, and there you go, very late dive to the inside there. It kind of almost wasn't particularly intentional, I don't think, initially, but he gathers it all up, and Daniel Ricciardo-esque brings it all together and snatches P16. Fantastic move there from the Swede. He's still got Noah Reeder planted on his gearbox, who is now sensing an opportunity in towards Dunlop, but he can't make that one stick, and that's going to be a rather suboptimal line for the Mercedes there, and could drop him out of contention to try to reclaim that spot as we go into the closing 15 minutes of the race. And speaking of 15, well, we'll say closing 16 minutes because it makes this next bit work better. We are 16 followers away from a wonderful milestone of 400. So if you have enjoyed the action that you have been watching so far, then do consider following the channel. There's been a whole host of you that have joined us today, and a big warm welcome to each and every one of you. It's fantastic to have you here and joining us on what has been a relatively recent endeavour onto the world of Twitch, and has been a glorious one at that, and I'm glad that you are all enjoying the racing as much as I am enjoying bringing it to life here in the best way that I can, as these drivers continue to put on a fantastic show for us. So yeah, do see, maybe there's a small chance we can hit 400 at the end of this one. We'll have to wait and see. But big thank you to everyone that has followed during this stream so far anyway. Number 23 car, just to give some updates on some penalties as we start to descend into a little bit of darkness, as that's just a timing delta, getting a little bit antsy and giving me some worries about things shuffling around without us knowing too much. Number 23 car of... who does that belong to? That is Nico Penn. Has a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision, so not ideal for him, as Marco Bischoff continuing to apply the pressure onto Tinko there, almost pushing him along through the first Degner, as you can see, he's just not been able to find an opportunity. Surely a send out of the hairpin will come at some point, but Tinko just making it really awkward in there, not making it clear which side he's going, and going very middle of the road. You can see Timo Carpenter in the background, actually faster than the pair of them last time around, but so, you know, he'll be very much in line to pounce if they do have a coming together of sorts, but right now, still very inherently close between the pair of them. The number 17 car got 2 5-second penalties, and that belongs to Renault Coach, so unfortunately that is going to drop him down a couple of positions. And a 5-second penalty for the number 14 car, and that is Valentine for contact. For some reckless driving, unfortunately for the Frenchman. So Stewart's hard at work, but now all rather caught up. Sometimes we tend to kind of finish getting through the lap 1 penalties when there's about 10 minutes of racing left to go. It very much does kind of flip from one to the other. We'll either have a million incidents on the first lap, or we'll have a very clean one. And good job to the drivers to keep it relatively clean. We haven't seen all too much in terms of Instance 9. Considering how tricky the circuit is, they've got the extra half an hour of racing to try to contend with as well, that the Pro Series drivers doing a fine job on that front. And much like we have not seen too much action, neither this man really. He's been hard at work at the front of the field, Dario Iamolo, continuing to lap in the 59s, a mid 59 at that, putting about 2 to 3 tenths on the rest of the field every single lap. And he has been absolutely faultless. I don't want to look at him nor talk about him for too long, because what a story it would be to come away from Misano. And I do not wish to commentate or curse something else. Like I say, I had probably one of the worst that I've had in a while. Which we've partly had chat involved in that as well, and where I feel like there was a 50-50 divide in responsibility as to who was the net cause of that. So I don't take full blame, but admittedly I am directing the cameras, so kind of, I suppose I should take the majority on that front. So I don't want to jeopardise anyone in these final 12 minutes of action. White flag for Noah Eder. Maybe just a bit of a mistake out of Dunlop. I think he may have just run a little bit wide. Sparks ablaze as he makes his way through the first deck nut. And let's see for the Mercedes driver is as he comes through turn 6 into all 70. You see struggling a bit with this car, having driven the Mercedes. Yep, that's exactly kind of what I thought might happen. Well gathered up from the German, but I said those front tyres would be screaming, and the Mercedes, well known to be a bit of a monster in terms of eating tyres. If the Cookie Monster, I think, could be portrayed into a car, that I think the Mercedes is certainly a bit on that one, kind of rather brute force by nature, and definitely eats tyres for breakfast. There's no doubt about that. And Suzuka as a circuit really does demand a lot on that front. Meanwhile, a battle that has suddenly developed that was not anticipating being the case. The two teammates, George Boothby versus Correcas. Of course, after that wheel issue for George, and he dropped the position and a good few seconds behind his young teammate, that he now finds himself less than half a second away from Grant, so maybe able to make a move in the near future, but he's only got 10.5 minutes to do something about it, so there's potentially a little bit of a tricky one to pull together in these closing stages, but he'll be looking to try to get that, because he'll be hoping if Bischoff can get P2 and George does make his way out towards P5, that kind of offsets a little bit the points difference again between himself and Tinko, and helps minimise the damage. And there is no love lost right now between these two McLarens. Grantus is fighting this just like he would with any other car, and I think George is going to be in for a little bit of a tough time if he wants to make this move. We've gone on board the front splitter of George Boothby, as he does seem to be gaining in the slipstream up the hill. Looks like he's got pretty handy top speed. He can't get to the inside line. Up into Spoon Curve. How is his exit, though, towards 130R? So he gets on the power. Pretty even between the pair of them, but he is already starting to gain just a little bit. Surely won't be close enough to do anything at 130R. Not on your teammate, of all things, and I don't think he will. He's just trying to spot his turning in point. Yeah, you can see. Backs out a little bit there. Grantus certainly pushing the limits on the exit. And now trying to see if he can set up the exit from Casio Triangle. Pretty even through there. Good traction as well from Correca, so I think he'll be safe for this time around, so running out of opportunity to reclaim that P5 spot for your technical overall championship leader, but your net championship leader is that bright purpley pink Audi that sits in front of Marco Bischoff and has been sitting there for quite a while in the grand scheme of things. Tinko not on the same kind of lightning level of pace that we have seen from him in the past, but clearly I would suggest, seeing as Adam Spansky is not quite with Tinko in this race, and that there are Lamborghinis 1, 3, and 4, there's a good chance of a Lamborghini is the favourite car to have around here, and the Audi may be second to that. It's a little bit tricky to tell, but certainly Tinko, I think, is outperforming that car a little bit and really extracting the maximum, because when he does have a car that is working well for him in terms of BOP, as I see a yellow flag for Valentine, And he's got a slow getaway as well, and I think it may well be exactly the same issue that we just saw for Noah Reader, making his way up towards Dunlop Curb. Actually, a slight Freudian slip there. I wasn't aiming for Dunlop Curb, but I have a feeling that might be where he ended up. See on the exit, yeah, more or less, it's more like Dunlop's gravel, really, with a bit of grass thrown into the mix as well. But much like Noah Reader, he does sort of hop and skip his jump his way out of the kitty litter and move onward with his race, but does rather compromise his chances of moving any further than P12. Scrap still all the way from end to end of this grid, with the largest gap between any cars. Generally speaking, you've got Dennis Wietschorker 16 seconds behind Noah Eder, but other than that, it is the gap between your race leader and P2, 14.5 seconds. Absolutely stellar efforts from Dario, who is still only half a second away from his fastest lap of the race on a 59.0. Fantastic pace from him. As Omashima brings out the white flag for a moment, maybe a little bit adventurous line through 130R, but he has managed to keep it on the circuit for the time being. What about George Boothby, still unable to make his way past his teammates, as Vignoli applying the pressure to Walsingham, Del Fanta. The Pro Series drivers have a habit of doing this, as, oh dear, no Reader. I think I saw a white flag come out, and I have a feeling that he ran wide at 130R. And then just to top things off, I think that's given him a corner cutting warning, and unfortunately will be the next victim of drive-through penalties. And to do that with just 6 minutes of the race left to go, that must be infuriating from his perspective. And also his tyres aren't going to thank him either when he does return to the circuit, because they will drop a little bit out of their window, and when they're so worn, they don't tend to go back into a very happy place either. And you can see he's actually just reappeared into 19th position. Make that 20th now, as a Renault Code sweeps around the outside of the German driver and gets himself a position in the process. So good job from the Estonian, making use of the opportunities that are coming his way. Speaking of which, 5.5 minutes left to go in this race, and it has been a close action between Marco Bischoff and Tinko van der Velde for a very long time now. And the German driver, the two-time Pro Series champion, continuing to try to see if he can open up any opportunities. But much like Brands Hatch, Tinko is just absolutely unflappable. He is just consistently putting in lap after lap, doing what he needs to do, defends barely, but in the right kind of way, where he doesn't really compromise himself too much in the process. And Marco Bischoff just doesn't seem to do too much about it. Meanwhile, I do believe that Mr. Vignoli has just had a little bit of an incident down at the final chicane. White flag out for Grant Korekis as well. Not sure what happened to him. So here you can see his Ferrari actually pretty handy in a straight line, gaining some time on the back straight toward Walsingham, and he gets onto the outside curb at 130R. I think, though, that there's a little bit of a follow-up issue here, potentially, through the chicane. No, it was a complete lie, and the Delta was not entirely accurate on that front, which is good, so no catastrophes there. Meanwhile, we've got Omashima swapping positions almost with Albin Manson, though I do believe that Simonov and Michael Frey just did some position swapping of their own, down for 21st place. I'm hesitant to go back on the replay, though, because it looks like they could even be continuing to scrap down towards turn 1, because it's a mighty exit for Michael Frey, who tries to go towards that inside wall. Well, I mean, okay, he was trying to go for the inside line. The inside wall was where he was heading if he committed in that direction. And now, poor straight line speed, a lot better than it used to be. Can't go around the outside, though. We've seen drivers go deep, and Simonov does in fact do that. Michael Frey says, thank you very much, gets the power down, and gives the McLaren a little bit of his own medicine, squeezes him out on the exit of turn 2 there. Meanwhile, yellow flag. Oh dear, there's been an incident down at the hairpin. I've almost been waiting for that to happen, because Suzuka, it usually happens at some point, but Manson and Omashima, they've managed to brilliantly crash into each other, restore working order, and lose nothing whatsoever. in terms of position. So thankfully not too much harm done, but it does look like Omashima may be taking a little bit of inspiration from Kobayashi, of course renowned for making moves. Down here, in fact, it's not even an attempt to move, it's just a small misjudgment. And thankfully, Omashima was still pointing in the right direction. Alvin Madsen was able to get going fairly quickly. And then Oliver Hagstrom has all of a sudden been presented potentially with some opportunities to make some moves there. But yeah, it's so easily done. It's not even an attempt to move there. It's just kind of misjudged the deceleration at the apex, which can definitely happen. Yeah, has then found himself making contact. So we'll have to see how the stewards play that one out. Clearly, Omashima did wait, so they may look a little bit more kindly upon him on that front. We'll see what comes through in just a moment. As 2 minutes left to go on the clock, and I think when Dario makes his way to the line, then that will be the final lap of the race, because he'd have to make it there in 10 seconds time if it were going to be 2 more laps. So running out of opportunities for these remaining battles, fights, drivers, all trying to see if they can do something about the various people they have been squabbling with in the closing stages of this race. And the stewards have been rather kind and have just given him a warning for that one. As oh no, excuse me, no, that's Michael Frey. They've given a warning to. That's rather interesting. I'm not quite sure what the warning would have been for. The only warning I would have dished out potentially would have been Simonov with his rather late move towards that inside wall. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there was something else that we didn't quite catch on camera prior to that that took place. It's difficult to tell. But meanwhile, I am Low is about to start his final lap. Marco Bischoff has fallen to a second away. Meanwhile, Nico Pendlin side by side, actually, with Sasha Engel, who sends it back up the inside at the S's. Dario Iamolo is going to be asking these guys to perhaps calm down just a little bit, because that green Lamborghini in the background is your race leader, who's been dominant from start to finish so far. So he would really like to avoid any dramas, I think, on the final lap of the race. Meanwhile, Oliver Hagstrom now going down the inside of Kazuki Omashima. This is going to be brave, but he's got nothing left to lose at this point. Down the inside, the STL Esports car trying to get the job done. The two McLaren, fantastic job from the pair of them to go side by side through there without any contact. Down into the Casio Triangle, still holding the outside line. Almost contact on the exit. Omashima gives him room though, and they're still having a drag race. Fantastic. It's allowed Alvin Madsen to run away very happily. He's got a 2.5 second gap now, but he's compromised the exit, has Hagstrom over Omashima as they look to try to have the drag race down towards turn 1, which McLaren is going to come out on top in this one around the outside. He attempts to go, but Omashima runs a little bit deep, and I think, and yet you see the flashing of the lights there. Hagstrom not happy about how that one played out whatsoever. As I do need to keep an eye on this man. He's currently making his way through Spoon Curve at the moment. Bischoff has reeled in Tinko van der Velde once again, but couldn't make the move down at the hairpin. He's running out of opportunities. George Boothby, same goes for him. Del Fanta, unable to do anything about Adam Spansky. Vignoli, same goes for him. All of these drivers running out of chances, running out of moments where they might be able to make something happen and something stick. But this man, he may not have had the greatest of camera coverage over today's race, but what a fine way to bounce back from the disappointment of Massano. P2 last week, make it P1, and leading every lap of this race fundamentally. Pole position, fastest lap, and a dominant display from Dario Iamolo. What a story for him to get his debut win here at Suzuka after coming so close in the closing stages. Meanwhile, Tinko van der Velde does hold on to P2 in the end. Bischoff unable to do anything about him. George Boothby, I don't think he's going to be able to do anything about Grant Karekas, and he'll be very disappointed about the issues with his wheel, but a valiant effort to try to get P5 in the end nonetheless. White flag was out for Valentin Barra, I think just perhaps a little bit of a moment down at 130R, but nothing too detrimental. Meanwhile, someone's trying to have another go. There was a blaze of fire coming out of the back of Omashima. I don't think his car's quite exploded, but as Oliver Hagstrom tries to find opportunity through the final chicane, but it's a good exit from Omashima, and, well, this is an interesting scenario. Now, I can only imagine that Oliver Hagstrom been pushing may have got penalty, a drive-through penalty on the last lap of the race, and he's trying to sort of Michael Schumacher style serve it across the line. I don't think that's quite going to work, because the drive-through doesn't clear until you reach the end of the pit lane, which he won't do until he has actually crossed the main finish line. So what's going to happen is he's going to lose the time from the pit lane and still get 30 seconds worth of penalties, if I'm not mistaken. So unfortunately, I don't think quite the greatest of tactics from Oliver there, but we live and we learn. You know, if it's any consolation to Oliver there, I've once driven on a bone-dry track for 45 minutes on wet tyres that got to 45 psi and gave me double rear punctures on the final lap of the race, and then I was actually unable to make it to the flag. And at the time, it seemed like a great decision that was really going to work out at the end. That was a shame for Michael Frey. That was some lovely drifts going on there in the Porsche, but unfortunately it does come to an end. Unfortunately, much like this fabulous race. And we will go through the results in a short moment. Also, hopefully, manage to grab some people for a little bit of an interview as well. It would be lovely to speak to those from today's race. Especially our race winner, if we can. Let's have a little bit of a gander. Is anyone waiting in the interview room for us? Not at the moment. As it stands, I have just had a couple of messages, but I think, unfortunately, that is not anything interview. He is just a bit out. Well, that's disappointing. He appeared in the interview room for about half a second and disappeared out again. Dario, if you are watching the stream, or if anyone is able to contact him, it would be lovely to speak to IMLO after that win. So don't shy away. I did see you pop in there. He's returned. There we go. Let's see if we can grab Dario in for a moment then and speak to our latest race winner here in the Case King Pro Series after the disappointment of Misano and a fantastic comeback drive from you there. You go one better, pole position, race win, fastest lap. You must be delighted with that performance.
Yeah. I mean, in the quali, I didn't do a great job. Tinko without put on a really good lap, because Lambo today, even with the Ferrari, I guess, was the best car with the BOP. So I was expecting to do like 57.5 in quali. That was a good lap. Luckily, I didn't. But also other drivers didn't beat me. So P1 was all I needed, because I knew I had a good race pace. So Tinko basically made all the job, because Audi is clearly slower in the Mavics, and yeah, I don't want to say that it was easy, because it was not, but yeah, let's say that the most job I did, all the job I did in the quali, basically.
Yeah, I'm very much with you there, and you know, but still fundamentally, you know, whilst maybe the Audi didn't have the strongest race trim performance, you know, it was very evident that you were still on another level. So I wouldn't put yourself down too much, because Marco Bischoff, two-time Pro Series champion, you know, Teemu Karppinen, previous race winner in the Lamborghini of all cars as well. You know, they know how to, you know, navigate their way around here in a pretty speedy fashion, and the pace that you demonstrated was, you know, it was consistent, it was quick, and there was always this, you know, at least a 0.2 of a second per lap advantage that you had over the rest of the grid. Sometimes it was even up at half a second. It was absolutely incredible stuff from you, and you know, it was you know, whilst of course as a commentator I can't have too much in the way of favouritism, but I was delighted to see you come away with that victory, because yeah, obviously it was almost on the table there at Misano, but so yeah, to come back and get that here was fantastic. And I have to ask you, because the you know, we haven't seen you in a while in the Pro Series, and this switch over to the Lamborghini, clearly it's working very nicely for you. How have you found it as a car? What made you go for that car in the end?
Well, let's say that I was quite. It was a must because of my team that has a collaboration with a real team that is Vincenzo Sospiri Racing. So I had to use the Lambo first of all.
That's a pretty good reason, in fairness.
Yeah, yeah. But let's say that in the beginning, I immediately had a good pace with Lambo. Then, yeah, when you race only with one car, you know the car, you know what you can do with the setup, you know the limit of the car. So it let's not say that it's easy for me to drive the Lambo because there's some track, even if it's faster, but it's pretty hard to drive. But let's say that I know Lamborghini pretty well because I did plenty of race and plenty of driving in that car.
Yeah, of course. It does allow you to really extract the maximum of that. So when you've got a car that's working well at a certain circuit as well, it's happy days with all of that. So yeah, fantastic stuff from you. And a final question before I let you head off and celebrate and probably have a decent rest after 90 minutes of racing around Suzuka. That's a hard enough challenge as it is. We've got Paul Ricard coming up as the next circuit. How are you feeling potentially for that one, especially as we've got a significantly higher chance potentially to rain on the cards? So how does that all potentially feel on that front for the Lambo?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the BOP after our S0 race, but if it's raining, then I'm sure that we're gonna see a good show on. So. And anyway, 90 minutes of race was pretty tough. Especially, it was tough just to keep the attention, because even in the second stint when already at like 10, 12 seconds, for me it's a must to keep go fast, because if I don't go fast, my attention really get low. So. And in fact, in just 2 laps, I kept two warnings. So when I kept 2 warnings, I say, okay, I need to push, because otherwise I will not finish the race.
It weirdly actually reminds me of I believe it was Mika Hakkinen at Monza many years ago, where it was the point at which he stopped pushing that then he made a mistake and he did double downshift and took himself out of the race. It's you get so dialed in to try to extract the maximum out of every lap that sometimes when you're exercising a bit more caution, that's where the mistakes sort of creep in. So yeah, full send all the way is the message on that front. Obviously within reason, but yeah, fantastic stuff, and it'd be really interesting to see how all that plays out at Paul Ricard next week. But I shall let you head off, Dario. Thank you very much for coming in for an interview, and a big congratulations to you once again on a fantastic comeback from what was still a great result last week, clearly, but disappointing, I'm sure. So yeah, big congratulations to you, and look forward to seeing what you can bring in a Lamborghini next.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dario. Fantastic there to speak to our race winner from today. And in terms of the weather for next week, when I had a gander, relative to what we have at Suzuka, whilst the chances of rain aren't massively high, we've got a 25% chance of rain, but also 30% chance of some variable conditions. So those things combined, and we have also had some very wet races around Paul Ricard in the past in the Pro Series. We'll see how it plays out. I could be completely wrong. It may be bone dry, maybe the driest race that we have all season long. But there may be some potential there, and I certainly wouldn't say no to some of that. It does give us quite the fun and excitement in the races when we have that extra dynamic in there. Great to speak to Dario there, and like I say, I can't pick favourites, but it's very nice to see that sort of almost rather cinematic style kind of response of a disappointment from last week, to then going from almost clinching his first victory in the Pro Series to then taking it by absolute dominance. A very well deserved from him, and a second and a first place in his return to the Pro Series. It'd be amazing to see if he does commit to a full season with us in Season 12, maybe what the Italian driver can do in terms of bid for the championship, because quite clearly at the moment, when the car is working well, he is looking very, very quick. So great stuff from him. But also, as for, of course, from the rest of the field as well. So let's have a little bit of a look through our final race results with all of that. So IMLO comes away with a very dominant victory in the Lamborghini with Tinko, Bischoff, Carpenter, Karekas, Boothby, Narks, Spansky, Delfanta, Walsingham, Vignoli, Jardier, Barrier, Manson, and Omashima rounding out your top 15. And we'll see that's unfortunately Oliver Hagstrom rather plummeted down the order with that slightly ill-executed drive-through at the end. Vitschorka, Fischer, Ida, Frey, Simonov, Coots, Clifford, Hagstrom, Engel, Pendon, Wieninger, Drexler, Pogorelov, Thompson, and Foch, your end to the top 30 with those last 5. Unfortunately being retirees from today's race, so a little bit of disappointment from their side on that front, but that is the way that sometimes Suzuka can go. It's an incredibly demanding circuit. Even Dario, who was perhaps not always the most occupied with cars around him during that, even he said, you know, that the 90 minutes, it is intense. It's a circuit which at any moment will bite you, and you know we've seen many a strong driver suffer similar fates around this absolutely legendary track, but in the end for Dario it proved no issue for today, made it look easy, even though of course driving at that sort of level is certainly a tricky task in itself, but great stuff from him. And also interesting in terms of the championship, with Tinko continuing to gain more and more points towards the top of the standings, and of course Marco Bischoff that is close up to the pointy end of the championship field as well, with Mr. Busby not having the best day in the office. Admittedly, probably had the pace for P5, which would have been better the rest of the McLarens, but a little bit hindered by that wheel issue during the race, which unfortunately saw him drop a position to his teammate. Will that come to haunt him? We'll have to wait and see, but certainly not the ideal way that he would have wanted things to go today, but it does potentially set us up more and more for a fantastic finale. But of course we'll have Paul Ricard coming up next week for the 10th round as we enter the final quarter of Season 11. We'll have to see what the drivers put on in terms of show there. Overtaking opportunities for days around that circuit with that very long back straight, and whether there be weather effects or not, there's certainly one that presents a lot of overtaking drama, track limit penalties because there's no grass in a 5-mile radius, I think, of that circuit. So it's certainly going to be an interesting one for how they negotiate that. And the Pro Series drivers will, of course, as ever, deliver a fantastic show. But that is going to be it for this evening. Thank you, everybody, so much once again for support. It's been amazing. Of all of you that have followed the channel during the stream as we close in on that 400 follower mark, and I have a sneaky suspicion that we could, even if we're lucky, cross that by this time next week, if not maybe during the next stream. And if you want to tune in and stick around for that, then do consider following the channel and tuning in same time at same place, where we'll be heading to Paul Ricard for the next round of the Case King Pro Series. And if you've had a look at what we've been doing tonight and you fancy a bit of driving yourself in the world of LFM, then head over to lowfuelmotorsport.com and get yourself signed up, get yourself a license, and you can start joining in with these incredible championships, whether it be things like the Pro Series or the daily racing sorts of activities as well. There are a whole plethora of prizes up for grabs, some of which are rather snazzy and I'm rather jealous of. I don't have the talent in order to be anywhere near in with a chance of getting any of them, so maybe you will be, and you can start to grab some of those wonderful things for yourselves. And if maybe ACC isn't quite your cup of tea and you fancy maybe something of the world of the Nordschleife, if you like that sort of grueling challenge, or prototype single-seaters, British touring cars, then R Factor 2 is also on the LFM platform. And also, if you kept an eye out on some polls recently, there was a bit of a poll going on between whether or not Assetto Corsa 1 or Race Room would be the next edition addition to LFL, or at least what you would prefer. And I think it was very heavily weighted in original Assetto Corsa, knowing the extensive modding capabilities and range of content on that one. Who knows, maybe at some point in the near future we could see a third platform joining as well. So let's see how it all plays out on that front. And of course, also looking forward to Season 12 with that custom BOP hard at work with the LFM team in the background as well. Many an exciting thing to look forward to. But if you just want to stay in touch with the latest and greatest news from LFM and join this ever-growing community of friendly sim racers, motorsport enthusiasts, and all things our four wheels and go brum on the way by, and people like me shouting at them, then do also join our Discord server, and it'll be wonderful to keep on welcoming in more and more of you into this fantastic ever-growing community. But that is going to be it then, everybody. So thank you, everybody, so much for watching. But until next time then, it's goodbye.